This book is art, okay? This is how you tell a story. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Prisoner of Azkaban was my introduction to the Harry Potter series. Before I had read any of the books or interacted with any of the movies, I was a very sheltered child. I first saw the Prisoner of Azkaban in my grandma's house. I was watching it in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep and I thought it would help. It didn't. But I loved this movie and I love this book. And yet there is so much inside of it that I don't just find problematic, but offensive. So, Prisoner of Azkaban. What shows up in this book? Let's talk about it. If you loved this series growing up, chances are it became a piece of you. There are many folks of a certain millennial generation with variations of Harry Potter tattoos on their bodies. This was a personality trait. Your Hogwarts house reflected something about your identity that hadn't otherwise been articulated in this way. It was special. And now, if you're an ally or a member of the LGBT community or a person that cares about whether or not your artist is doing harm with their bigoted beliefs, you have to engage with the series in a different way. JK Rowling's clear artistic and storytelling ability imply a certain intelligence that's pretty incongruent with the very loud bigotry that she is espousing today. The body of work implies something about the capability of the author. This book is tight, it's clean, it's warm, it's terrifying, but do we have to discount the body of work? Because what is bigotry if not ignorance? And if one is willfully ignorant and has every resource and education tool available to them, doesn't willful ignorance mean one is not smart? I think what distinguishes JK Rowling from someone like a Stephenie Meyer is that Stephenie Meyer has been candid about the fact that she put it all on the page without any real intention. She wasn't trying to do anything. She didn't have a racist agenda. She just gave us what feels like a naked look at her psychology, and what happens to be on the page is racism. We'll get there. JKR is trying to do something. She's making very intentional points. She's having a lot of conversations about enormous social justice topics. And then, if you scratch the surface of the love and light veneer, there seems to be something kind of always darker underneath it, which begs the question, what exactly was JKR trying to do? And as we get older and as she becomes more transparent about her own ideologies and beliefs, as she becomes more transparent about her transphobia, her being a person of love and light seems a little bit less clear. The body of work implies a person of clear intellectual merit. And yet, if these are the points she was trying to make, her intellect makes this all the more nefarious. This book opens with Harry at the Dursleys. He's trying to do his homework, but he's not allowed to do his homework in the daylight hours because if Vernon Dursley, his uncle, sees him doing homework, he'll get in a lot of trouble. So he's currently writing an essay about the witch burning in the 14th century and why it was pointless. Harry's not allowed to mention anything pertaining to his abnormality, which is just his ability to do magic. But a few things have changed this year. He gets to keep his school books and other magical accoutrement underneath his floorboards as long as he's not seen using them. Hedwig is also allowed out this summer because she makes so much racket when she's locked in her cage, when she is held hostage. Harry hasn't seen her for a few days, but he's not worried about her. She goes off on her own all the time. Harry explains to us that Ron had tried to call using the telephone. Ron didn't know how the telephone worked, so he screamed into it, and that really perturbed the Dursleys, so Ron's not allowed to call anymore. And so Harry hasn't really heard from his friends almost all summer. Harry looks up at the clock and realizes that it's 1 o'clock in the morning and that he has in fact been 13 for 1 whole hour. He has never received a birthday card in his entire life before today. And the reason that Harry's never received a birthday card is because his parents had been murdered by Lord Voldemort, the most feared dark wizard in over 100 years. Harry acknowledges to himself that he's lucky to have made it to his 13th birthday at all, because there have been not one, not two, but 3 attempts on Harry's life. He's come face to face with Lord Voldemort 3 times and walked away relatively unscathed. So Harry informs us that he's never received a birthday card before, but that all changes this year. Hedwig has returned and she has brought with her a very downtrodden Earl. He's the Weasleys' elderly owl. Earl, as usual, has been very put out by the journey because he's elderly and seemingly given no resources to accommodate equity versus equality folks. He needs some breaks on the other end. And, that's fine. Anyway, but he's brought Harry a birthday present from Ron. Ron has sent 2 pieces of paper. One of them is a letter and one of them is a newspaper clipping. The newspaper clipping is an announcement about Arthur Weasley. He's the head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. He won, apparently, the annual Daily Profit grand prize of 700 galleons, and he was able to take his entire family on a trip to Egypt to visit their eldest son. Harry says he can't think of a single other family more deserving of a large pile of gold, because the Weasleys are very nice and very poor. That's the exposition we get on the Weasleys. So a lot of this book highlights what may be intentional contradiction in JK Rowling's writing and in the characters' philosophy. This shows up when it comes to Weasleys and poverty. The Weasleys are often portrayed as heroes. They are the family that Harry wishes he had. We're very much supposed to look up to them and we're supposed to want good things for them. Them being poor is not a mark against them by any means in the eyes of the reader. They are good, they are right, they are just, and they are poor. Malfoy, on the other hand, and even the Dursleys are generationally wealthy, and this marks them as less good. We see wealth versus poverty reflected in 2 sides of the same coin, and it looks like one of these sides is right and one of these sides is wrong. But Harry is also rich. We love how benevolent he is with his cash. He's often buying his friends treats and sharing whenever he can. Of course, James Potter, Harry's dad, is ultimately a trust fund jock. He's born into economic privilege, and it does result in him eventually being the type of person that targets another child and derives joy out of humiliating and hurting someone who he finds to be weaker than him for whatever reason, which we'll obviously dive more into in the future. It's just something to consider. The contradiction. The Weasleys are good because they are poor, the Malfoys are bad because they are rich, and yet Harry is good and rich. Ron is explaining in his letter that his dad won 700 galleons and they spent most of it this trip, but now they are able to afford the things that they otherwise couldn't. Ron has acquired a new wand and also new robes, so on and so forth. Ron says, don't let the Muggles get you down, try and come to London, meet us in Diagon Alley. He also says, Harry, happy birthday, I'm attaching a pocket sneakoscope. If there's someone untrustworthy around, it lights up and spins. He says it was pretty cheap. He doesn't necessarily think it works, but that's not true. It does work, and we can know as readers that from this point on, moving forward for the next thousands and thousands of pages of book, if we see a sneakoscope, someone untrustworthy is around, regardless of whether or not the characters think it's on the fritz. It's not. He also has received a birthday present from Hermione. Hermione explains that she was nervous about calling because of the whole Ron incident, but then Hedwig turned up at her house, and it's clear that Hedwig wanted Harry to receive gifts this year for a change. Last year, Harry didn't receive any birthday cards because Dobby intercepted all of his mail in an ill-conceived attempt to save Harry, and Hedwig had been locked in her cage, so she couldn't do anything about it. So Hedwig took it upon herself to go to Hermione's, and Hermione has sent a broomstick servicing kit, which Harry loves immediately, and he's being loved and celebrated on his birthday for the first time in his life. He also has received a letter from Hagrid. Hagrid also sent like some rock cakes. Whenever the kids talk about Hagrid's cooking, it always seems to like glue their jaws together, so they don't eat anything that Hagrid sends, but Hagrid has sent some food, and he's also sent a book. Harry says he knows that Hagrid wouldn't ever send him anything dangerous on purpose, but Hagrid's idea of dangerous is a little bit different than a normal person's. That concept is immediately demonstrated for us when Harry opens the book Hagrid has sent, book snapshots on his hand, and like flies past him and like runs around the room, and like Harry has to find a way to contain this seemingly alive book. He also receives his letter from Hogwarts, which this year has a permission slip enclosed. Third years at Hogwarts are allowed to visit Hogsmead, which is an all-wizard village that's just outside of Hogwarts. Third years will only be allowed to go if they have permission from a parent or guardian, and Harry's a little bit worried about this because the Dursleys don't like Harry to experience any joy or happiness. In fact, they spent the first 11 years of his life believing that if they could make him as miserable as possible, if they could exacerbate his suffering, his magical prowess would be stifled in some way. So they're going to be unlikely to sign the permission slip. So Harry comes downstairs the next day to see Vernon watching the news. The news is warning the public about Sirius Black, a serial murderer who has escaped from his former prison. He's apparently armed and extremely dangerous. We hear Vernon Dursley saying, "They don't need to tell us he's good for nothing. Look at the state of him. The filthy layabout. Look at his hair." It's just JK Rowling demonstrating for us who the Dursleys are. She is, through example, recognizing them as conservative people, drawing that line between morality and cleanliness. And that's interesting because the next page of that conservative playbook is the line between morality and skinniness, and moreover, fatness with sin. So let's talk about the fatphobia. JKR and other authors typically employ fatness in literature to mean something. It's almost never just fatness. In fact, most descriptions of people's bodies in this body of work are meant to indicate something about their character. So I think with the Dursleys, it's pretty obviously meant to critique our culture of overconsumption. Dudley is a bully and entitled and ungrateful because he's been given too much. And of course, in a house where the men are meaty and porky, Aunt Petunia is the inverse. She is thin and horse-faced. Does that imply that she's malnourished in a household with too much? Is JKR commenting on women's oppression? Is she commenting on what is required of women when they supplicate to a culture of patriarchy and capitalism? I don't know. The inverse is true of Mrs. Weasley, whose plumpness marks her as nourishing and warm. It's interesting because JKR's use of bodies is both a commentary on and a participation in fatphobic culture. She's equally as culpable of the behavior she seems to be critiquing in that moment. When we close this book, we've only seen Harry compliment the appearance of one woman, and that is Cho Chang. And the words that he affords her are extremely pretty. That's 2 words. All the other women in the series are described really differently. We get words like horse-faced, pug-faced, she's no pixie. The librarian has the stature of a vulture. Trelawney is described as insect. And I think, much to JKR's maybe chagrin, this is what spurs the Harry is bisexual theories. Harry doesn't articulate positive remarks when it comes to the women or girls in the book. If he's mentioning a woman's body or face, it's typically with scorn. But he does seem to have a lot of respect and admiration for the bodies, face, appearances of the men around him. Fatphobia is obviously rooted in patriarchy and white supremacy. White culture insists on women's skinniness because it's about subservience. It's easier to dominate a malnourished and weak person. Aunt Marge, on the other hand, is coded as masculine, and it's counted among her less savory qualities. So while JKR seems to be making a very obvious critique about the Dursleys, we're not supposed to like them. We're supposed to be able to tell that they are bullies and problematic and unhappy and the perpetuators of their own suffering. And at the same time, she is coding them in a way and using a certain vernacular, trying to tie their appearance to their moral repugnance. And in doing that, JKR is sharing with us her own views about what a person should look like and sound like and be like. Aunt Marge is Uncle Vernon's sister. She's coming to Privet Drive to visit for 1 whole week. This is horrible news to Harry because Aunt Marge, if you think the Dursleys are bullies, wait till you get a load of Aunt Marge. Poor Harry. He tells us that one year Aunt Marge showed up with a robot dog for Dudley and a box of dog biscuits for Harry. She breeds dogs, I guess, and she typically brings 1 or 2 dogs with her. Her favorite dog, Ripper, had apparently chased Harry into a tree one night, and she didn't call the dog off until well after midnight. So Harry's really upset to hear that Aunt Marge is on her way. Then Vernon tells Harry that Aunt Marge doesn't know that he goes to Hogwarts. She doesn't know about his magical affliction. Vernon has told his sister that Harry goes to St. Brutus's Secure Center for Incurably Criminal Boys. And Vernon threatens Harry and says, "You will pretend that that's the truth, play along, or I'm going to hurt you." And Harry says, well, a week is a really long time to not accidentally slip up and talk about magic, so maybe if you'd sign my permission form, I'd be more highly incentivized to lean into this act. And Vernon's like, why would I do that? I'm just gonna beat the shit out of you if you don't do what I tell you. And Harry says, well, beating the shit out of me won't make Marge forget what I tell her. So, 1 up on Harry. Harry is always counting the days until he gets to go to Hogwarts because being at the Dursleys is so horrible. Remember, they are often starving Harry, ignoring Harry, or berating Harry for not cleaning or for existing in a way that they find to be unsavory, which typically has something to do with his hair, which is his like main attribute that he inherited from his dad. It's a whole thing. So Harry goes back up to his room to prepare for Aunt Marge. He says, Hedwig, you better clear out for the week. And he like stuffs all of his stuff under his floorboards. So Aunt Marge shows up and she says a lot of horrible things. You'd have gone straight to an orphanage if you'd been dumped on my doorstep. She asks Harry if they use the cane at St. Brutus's, and Harry's like, oh yeah, all the time. It's actually the end of dinner on the last night of Aunt Marge's visit, and she sort of starts in on her really disgusting tirade. She's talking about Harry and insisting that it's not Vernon's fault that Harry is the way he is. We know. She says if there's something rotten on the inside, there's nothing anyone can do about it. Yes, this is the opposite of the point of the books, which is that you get to decide who you get to be, you get to decide what your fate is going to be. And yet, put an asterisk next to that because we're gonna get there, and if you know, you know. Petunia and Vernon and Dudley are all becoming more nervous because they understand Harry to be a dangerous creature in this house. They consider him a threat, and they have always treated him that way. So as Marge is really getting going, if there's something wrong with the bitch, there'll be something wrong with the pup. She says Harry has the look of a ratty little thing. He's clearly weak and underbred. At that point in time, her brandy glass explodes in her hand. Harry says it's been a really long time since he's made something explode without intention. But Marge explains it away, says she has a really firm grip. And obviously, Aunt Marge talking about breeding is meant to link these muggles to the wizards that engage with pureblood ideology. He's just having to sit there, and it's been an entire week of him just like tolerating this, just enduring the most disgusting vitriol pouring out of this horrible person's mouth. She asks about Harry's father. What did he do again? Vernon's like, he didn't work. He was unemployed. And he gives like a half glance at Harry. I don't know why they don't just say he was a police officer. He basically was a wizard cop. Harry kind of snaps and he says that's not true. She calls him a nasty little liar, says your parents died in a car crash. They left you to be a burden on their decent, hardworking relatives. She's like screaming at him. Like this is a 13-year-old child that she's screaming about the death of his parents. This leads Harry to lose control of his rage and fury. And I will remind you that the last 2 years of his life, well, his whole life has been traumatizing, but the last 2 years specifically, he's had really traumatic encounters that could have ended in his death, and he has received no help or counseling for them. And because they always happen at the end of the year, he gets sent back to this really abusive and negligent place to just sort of stew on it. He's completely isolated and he's stuck ruminating about the most terrifying things. He spends a lot of time wondering where Voldemort is and when he'll have to meet him next. Because statistically, that happens like once a year to Harry. As this horrible woman slanders his dead parents, he maybe accidentally, maybe intentionally blows her up. She doesn't explode. He just expands her to the point where she stretches out of the chair and then floats up onto the ceiling. And Harry says, I'm out. I'm done. Peace. Vernon is like, come back. Like, put her right now. And Harry's like, no, I'm going. I've had enough. And he packs all of his things and he leaves the Dursleys' house. And he has no money to his name. All of his wizard money is in the Wizarding Bank Gringotts, so he has no way to get there. And he's walking down the dark street and he starts to have a panic. What he's just done is elicit underage magic. And last year, when Dobby did magic in his house, he received a letter that said if the instances of underage magic are to continue in front of his muggle relatives, he could very well be expelled. So Harry spends the next hour and some change planning his life as a fugitive. What can I do? I can bewitch my trunk, make it light, I can get under my cloak, and I could fly my broom to London and I could just begin my life as an outcast. He's starting the grieving process. He's like, I guess I'll never go back to Hogwarts. This is so sad. And he sits down in the street and he's having his panic. He senses someone or something standing in the narrow gap behind him. And he turns to look at it and he thinks he sees an enormous black dog. Then all of the sudden, out of nowhere comes this huge triple-decker, violently purple bus. It's basically appeared out of thin air. This is the Night Bus, emergency transport for any stranded witch or wizard. Stan Shunpike, an 18 or 19-year-old at most, steps out of the bus looking for the witch or wizard that had summoned the Night Bus. Harry obviously didn't summon it. but he's so grateful to have found an entrance into the magical world that he doesn't think much about it again. Stan asks Harry's name, but Harry's a little bit afraid that what he's just done to Aunt Marge will mean that the wizarding community and the Aurors are basically on the hunt for him. He's also like the most notorious and famous wizard in the entirety of the wizarding world, and he doesn't feel like having that conversation, so he lies and he says his name is Neville Longbottom. He gets onto the bus, he chooses one of the beds, and we and Harry take off into the wizarding world, grateful to leave the horrible Dursleys behind. He says he wouldn't be able to sleep on this bus, even without all the banging and jumping hundreds of miles at a time. The night bus is driving super erratically, and it's sort of apparating from one place to another as it drops off the other witches and wizards that are taking this transport tonight. Harry says, don't we have to worry about the muggles seeing us? And Stan's like, oh, you don't have to worry about that. Muggles, they never notice anything and they don't really look, do they? Stan is reading a newspaper and it has an article about Sirius Black. And Harry says, oh, I saw him on the Muggle News. And Stan's like, of course he was on the Muggle News. Where have you been? And this is when we learn that Sirius Black is possibly the most infamous prisoner to ever grace the halls of Azkaban. We learn that the reason Sirius Black was imprisoned at all was because he murdered 12 Muggles and 1 wizard. Apparently, there were witnesses to this. He did this in broad daylight. When Aurors showed up to manage the scene, apparently Black was just laughing. He made no attempt to escape. Apparently, Black was a big supporter of you-know-who. To even further his notoriety, no one has ever escaped from Azkaban before. Harry immediately starts comparing himself to Sirius Black. He has this intrusive thought, imagining Stan Shunpike talking about Harry Potter blowing up his aunt as if it's the same as murdering 13 people. Harry's like, oh no, they're going to talk about me like that. Was inflating Aunt Marge bad enough to land him in Azkaban? And I think the jury's still out on this. We're going to go through the rest of the book, and you don't have to worry. Harry's not going to Azkaban for blowing up Aunt Marge, but I think it's pretty clear that he doesn't get into the trouble that he otherwise would if he'd been anybody else. Harry asks the night bus to drop him off at the Leaky Cauldron in Diagon Alley. There, he is greeted by the one and only Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge. I almost said Coriolanus. Cornelius Fudge. He introduces himself and Harry's like, oh my god, I know who you are. He's the wizard prime minister. And Cornelius Fudge is just grateful to see Harry. He's like, oh my god, I started to think, we're just so glad you're safe. And Harry doesn't know why they're so concerned about his safety, but he knows this isn't the greeting that a fugitive likely gets from the Minister of Magic. He also is a little bit suspicious because surely the Minister of Magic doesn't really handle cases of underage magic. Fudge says, hey, you'll be pleased to hear we handled the situation at Privet Drive. Marjorie Dursley has been restored to her normal size. He also says your aunt and uncle are happy to welcome you back next summer, as long as you don't come home for Christmas or Easter. What do you mean? I can go back to Hogwarts? I'm not expelled? And Fudge is like, oh my god, why would we? No, my dear boy, it was an accident. And Harry's like, are you sure? Because underage magic, performing magic in front of muggles, was a law that was really emphasized in the last book. So Harry's like, are you sure? Are you sure? And Fudge is like, surely you don't want to be expelled. Fudge is like, okay, so you stay here for the rest of the holidays. He gives Harry a few ground rules, asks him to stay at the Leaky Cauldron, to stay inside at night. He's walking out the door, asking Harry to be safe. Harry says, well, wait, Minister, maybe you could sign my permission form so I could go to Hogsmead. And Fudge looks pretty uncomfortable. And it's like, Harry has just asked the president. Harry has just asked the top person of power to sign his permission form. He's like, surely that would matter more than Vernon. Fudge looks really uncomfortable and he's like, no, I'm sorry, Harry. And Harry's like, yeah, sure, totally get it. Puts it back in his pocket. And Harry goes into the Leaky Cauldron and he is alone for the first time in his life, and his time is his own for the first time in his life. So he's very excited. This is a huge improvement. His last week he just spent being truly abused by Aunt Marge. So there's this really comfy bed, polished oak furniture, a crackling fire, and perched on top of the wardrobe is Hedwig, who has arrived around the same time as Harry. Harry spends the next few weeks, and we as the reader get to spend the next few weeks in Diagon Alley, and it's a fun insight into the world. We get to see Harry interact with the ice cream shop owner, and he actually was around during the witch burnings of the 14th century, so he gives Harry the lowdown on the whole history, and he helps Harry write his essay. Harry has lots of money, but he's never counted it, and there doesn't seem to be an online banking system, and honestly, I've done what I can. I have spent hours trying to comprehend the money system, and truthfully, it just doesn't make sense. The way that Harry tempers his spending is he has to remind himself how it would feel to have to ask the Dursleys for money to buy spell books, so he's cautious about his spending. He's conservative with his cash. And that becomes significantly more challenging when one day he walks across a store that has the firebolt in the window. This is the latest and greatest state-of-the-art broomstick. They don't even list the price in the window. It says price upon request. Other things that happen in Diagon Alley is Harry buys his new books because he has 2 new classes this year, Care of Magical Creatures and Divination. When he goes to buy his books, he's directed to that section of the bookstore, and while back there, he sees a book on the shelf of death omens, and on the cover of the book is a big black dog, and Harry worries because he just saw a big black dog right before he almost got hit by the night bus, and so he starts to worry that maybe that was a death omen. Ron, the Weasleys, and Hermione eventually arrive in Diagon Alley. They're also staying at the Leaky Cauldron before they all catch the Hogwarts Express. Harry fills them in on the blowing up of Aunt Marge. Ron thinks it's absolutely hilarious, and Harry's like, I really didn't mean to. I just lost control. And so I think what's being demonstrated here is 2 things. I think Harry did intentionally take out his rage on Aunt Marge. And I mean, hey, who wouldn't? I've been 13. The goblet exploding was not Harry intentionally exploding her goblet, but it does seem like he did intentionally blow up Aunt Marge in a moment of seeing red. Harry's like, I really thought I was going to be expelled, and Ron's like, well, probably you didn't because it's you, right? You're the famous Harry Potter. Other important things, Ron's rat Scabbers, which we've known him to have for the last 2 years, and we know he inherited from Percy. His parents got him his own owl as a gift for being named a prefect, and Ron inherited Scabbers. So he's had Scabbers in his possession, in his company, for 2 years. But since Egypt, Scabbers has been kind of ill, a little sickly. He's being weird. Harry, Ron, and Hermione go to a magical creature shop in Diagon Alley to see if they have any sort of tonic for Scabbers, and Hermione is thinking about getting her own owl. When they get there, the witch is like, bang him on the counter. She's looking at Scabbers. He's pretty tattered. He has a front paw with a toe missing. The magical creatures expert says an ordinary common or garden rat can't be expected to live longer than 3 years or so. And Ron's like, well, this rat has been in my family for 12 years. So we just take really good care of him. As they're having that conversation, something large and huge jumps from a topmost cage onto Ron's head. One of the cats that was up for adoption in this creature shop has just attacked Ron and Scabbers. This leads Hermione to adopt the straggly, beraggled cat named Crookshanks. Now, one of the more widely accepted fan theories is that Crookshanks was originally Lily and James Potter's cat. Obviously, the store owner mentions that Crookshank has been in the shop for ages, and in Lily's letters to Sirius later on, she'll mention a cat. It could explain why Crookshanks immediately takes to Sirius and recognizes him for something different than what he is. Perhaps Crookshanks recognizes Peter Pettigrew and is already allied against him. So there are many people who believe that Crookshanks is ultimately Harry's family member. But Hermione adopts Crookshanks, and Ron cannot understand it. Ron's like, that is an ugly cat, and it's a predatory cat because it continues to attack my rat. The kids head back to the Leaky Cauldron, and Harry greets the rest of the Weasleys. He greets Percy, who has been afforded the title of head boy. I'm very embarrassed about this. In my Philosopher's Stone video, I got it wrong. I said that Percy was head boy, which he is now in his final year. But before, he'd merely been awarded the title of prefect. So this is like a step up, and apparently this has made him more pompous than ever. Percy shakes his hand when they see each other. Harry is standing in Ron and Percy's room that they're sharing at the Leaky Cauldron while they're packing up their trunks before they leave for the Hogwarts Express in the morning. As Percy is packing up his things, he notices that his head boy badge is gone. To me, it's pretty clear that what Percy wants is respect. He'll eventually ally himself against his family and against the side of justice because the other side is the side that is currently holding respect and power. And I think that probably has something to do with the way he's treated at home. We witness it in particular with Fred and George. I'm not saying that Percy's eventual arc is acceptable. I'm just saying that it's traceable. Mrs. Weasley might be a piece of this problem because in every book we see her compare Fred and George to Percy and his accolades, his owls, whatever it is. Of course, they have a little bit of disdain or resentment for Percy, who is being put on a sort of pedestal for who he is, which we don't know anything about Percy except that he seems to be infused with a certain superiority. Anyway, Fred and George have enchanted his badge to now say Big Head Boy, which is mean. But anyway, Percy's badge is missing, and so is Ron's rat tonic, and Harry offers to go downstairs to look for the items. When he's down there, he overhears a conversation between Arthur and Molly Weasley. They're arguing about whether or not Harry has a right to know about Sirius Black. Arthur Weasley believes that Harry has a right to know that Sirius Black may be targeting Harry Potter. They say things like if the night bus hadn't picked him up, they were prepared for Harry to be dead. Apparently, the rest of the wizarding world believes that Sirius Black escaped Azkaban to come looking for Harry at Hogwarts. Mr. Weasley also tells Molly that there will be new security measures at Hogwarts this year, so those new security precautions mean having the Dementors of Azkaban outside the gates of Hogwarts. Apparently, Dumbledore's not happy about it at all. Harry walks back upstairs to his room and he's like, okay, well that explains it. Of course, Sirius Black is after me. The notorious murderer is targeting me. And the thing that bothers Harry about this is not that his life is once again imminently threatened, because Harry's kind of like, hey, like, listen, like Voldemort's after me. And so like, even if Sirius Black is Voldemort's number 2 guy, like, Harry's like, okay. And he's particularly bummed now because he's like, that's why everyone's being weird and why no one's gonna let me go to Hogsmeade. The next day, they all move to get on the Hogwarts Express, and as they're getting on the train, Molly gives Harry an extra hug, and he says it was a little embarrassing, but mostly he was quite pleased. Before he can get on the train, Arthur pulls Harry aside, asks Harry to not be a hero. He makes him promise that he won't go looking for Sirius Black. I'm not gonna go looking for Sirius Black. Why would I go looking for someone who's trying to kill me? And also, Sirius Black can't be worse than Voldemort, can he? Like, Harry's like, you guys, like, this isn't new information. It's just an extra person that maybe wants me dead. So Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Jenny are all getting on the train and they're looking for a compartment to sit together. And Harry doesn't feel like he can disclose this information with Jenny around, so he tells Ron that he needs to speak to him privately. And Ron's like, go away, Jenny. And she's like, oh, that's nice. Harry, Ron, and Hermione find a compartment to sit in on the train. The only one that's like empty of students has a sleeping adult man in it. He's wearing an extremely shabby set of wizard's robes. Hermione deduces that this must be their new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher because it's the only position that's open. We get the reinforcement that there are rumors that the job is jinxed. No one has maintained the position for more than a year in quite a while. While they're on the train compartment, the sneakoscope starts to go off and they're all like, it's on the fritz again. Nope. They talk about Hogsmeade. Hogsmeade is the only entirely non-Muggle settlement in Britain. Harry informs them that he can't go because the Dursleys didn't sign his permission form and Fudge wouldn't sign it either. And Ron is like, what? At that moment, Draco, flanked by his cronies, Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle, come into their train compartment and start to bully Ron. They're like, heard your dad got his hands on some gold. Did your mother die of shock? Suddenly, the train comes to a jolt. It stops. There are loud bangs that indicate to the kids that their luggage is maybe being rifled through, when we are confronted by a Dementor for the first time. Dementors have come to search the train for Sirius Black because they can't get into the castle. The first thing that Harry sees of the Dementors is a hand. The hand is glistening, grayish, slimy looking, and scabbed, like something dead that had decayed in water. All of a sudden, Harry feels an extreme cold. There's a rushing in his ears, as if he's underwater. From far away, he hears a terrified screaming. We later learn that what Harry is hearing are the final screams of his mom before she was murdered. And the movies make Lily's screams sound like a train whistle, probably to avoid traumatizing an entire generation. But that's not what Harry hears. Every time a Dementor approaches Harry, he hears the last few minutes before his parents died. And every single time he's in the presence of a Dementor, he gets more and more access to that night, to the murder of his family. Harry is being re-traumatized every single time one of these Dementors is around. That first time, what Harry hears is an unidentifiable woman screaming, and then he passes out. And when he wakes up, he asks who screamed. And Ron says, no one screamed. Ron said he didn't obviously pass out or hear screaming, but he felt like he'd never be cheerful again. Jenny is currently at that moment huddled in a corner looking nearly as bad as Harry feels, and she's sobbing. Jenny's impacted by the Dementors because she was possessed by Voldemort last year and forced to do his bidding, which included killing several animals. Is she getting help for this? No. Harry's like, well, did anyone else pass out? And Ron says no. It's eventually explained that the more severe a person's trauma history, the more likely they are to be impacted by the Dementors. The Dementors evoke a person's trauma, and they're drawn to Harry because of his tasty pain. Lupin says, I didn't poison the chocolate, please eat it. And he takes a bite of chocolate and feels immediate warmth spread back into his fingers and toes. And I really like that. I think that's very clever. Just as a person that finds myself reaching for chocolate or sugar in general when feeling down or, whenever, the idea that chocolate is a very potent healing tool throughout the course of this book, a necessary healing tool, is really awesome. Especially because there are obviously legitimate healing properties in dark chocolate. I don't typically eat the type of chocolate that has legitimate healing properties, but it does tend to make us feel better. And to weave it into a fictional magical world and make chocolate in itself magic, I just think is a nice little touch that runs through the whole book. Professor Lupin knows Harry by name. Harry assumes that Lupin knows his name because everyone knows his name, but that's not why. The Hogwarts Express arrives at Hogwarts. The children deboard the train. First years are ceremonially rowed across the lake to the castle, but we didn't know how everyone else in the school gets in because last year Harry and Ron flew here in their dad's car. There are stagecoaches, apparently 100, waiting for the students to be taken back up to the castle, and Harry assumes that they're pulled by invisible horses because he can't see anything. So the coach sets off by itself and the kids head up to the castle. Harry is immediately taunted by Malfoy when he sees him for fainting. Apparently Neville let it slip that Harry fainted, but he can't get too many taunts in before Professor Lupin also steps out of a carriage. Before Harry and Hermione can go into the feast, they're pulled away by Professor McGonagall. You don't need to look that worried. I just want a word in my office. The first thing she says to Harry is, "Are you okay? I heard you fainted," and Harry goes red in the face. He's really embarrassed to have been impacted by the Dementors this way. He believes that it means he's weak. Madame Pomfrey is waiting for them as well. "Oh, it's you, is it? I suppose you've been doing something dangerous again?" And when I read that, I felt it was a little bit unfair because the last few books when we've seen him in the hospital wing, it's not necessarily because he was doing something dangerous. It was because, bludgers had been bewitched and teachers had dissolved his bones. But then I think actually, he did end the last book by just wandering into the Chamber of Secrets. So maybe that's fair on Madame Pomfrey. Harry explains that he doesn't need any help from Madame Pomfrey and that in fact Lupin already gave him some chocolate. And she's like, wow, okay, so a defense against the dark arts teacher that knows his remedies. Immediately, we recognize Lupin as a credible character and someone who we can trust to sort of be an adult in these scary situations, which has not been true of almost any of the other teachers outside of McGonagall and Dumbledore that we've met. Hermione and McGonagall speak privately, and then Harry and Hermione go back to the feast. They miss the sorting. Dumbledore stands up in front of the feast, and Harry tells us that Dumbledore is regarded as one of the greatest wizards of his age, but that's not why Harry respects him. In fact, Harry tells us that as soon as he sees Dumbledore, he feels calm for the first time since the Dementor entered the train compartment. Harry explicitly states that he sort of thinks as Dumbledore as a person that can solve almost any problem, which also explains why Harry isn't half as afraid as he maybe should be, because Harry feels truly safe whenever Dumbledore's around. Dumbledore tells the kids that no one is to leave school without permission. There are Dementors posted up around the outskirts of the school, and they will not hear excuses. They don't care about innocence, and they won't be fooled by invisibility cloaks. Percy is introduced as head boy, and he's described puffing out his chest and looking around impressively. I don't know why I'm so bothered. I think it's because the writing, Percy's action alone is not enough to warrant the disdain that the rhetoric employed. I don't think we're meant to like him, but we don't know almost anything about him except that he has a girlfriend and he's often announcing that he's head boy or prefect. He seems to have to be asking for the respect that his title is supposed to warrant him, which makes us, obviously, as the reader, or when I was reading it as a kid, it made me respect him less. He's puffing out his chest and looking around impressively as he's introduced as head boy. I do think Percy should be having some reaction when Dumbledore is saying find head boy and head girl. They are authority figures in the school. He should be indicating somehow that he is head boy. It should be more than just a badge. He should be raising his hand. What if a first year needs him? I'm just saying it's not wild to be yep, that's me. To me, it's clear that what Percy is reflecting is insecurity, despite the fact that his accolades should afford him some confidence. It kind of creates this sort of idea that some people are born with it and some people aren't. That's how it feels to me, anyway, personal opinion. Then Dumbledore introduces our 2 new teachers. Of course, Professor Lupin, who will be taking over the Defense Against the Dark Arts position, and Hagrid will now be one of their professors. He will now be teaching the students care of magical creatures. And Ron's like, we should have known. Who else would have assigned us a biting book? Harry's observing the reactions at the professor's table, and he's a little bit startled to see that Snape is looking at Lupin with a look of such loathing on his face. He's like, oh my god, that look is usually reserved for me, which is terrifying. And he sees Hagrid like wiping his eyes on the tablecloth. He's crying. This is a really big get for Hagrid. He's not technically a fully qualified wizard because he was expelled in his 3rd year of Hogwarts for a crime that he did not commit. Hagrid explains to the kids that when Professor Kettleborn retired, said that he'd had enough and that he wants to spend his time with his remaining limbs. Professor Dumbledore came straight down to his hut and offered him the position. And Hagrid said it's what he's always wanted. This is his biggest dream that he did not believe a possibility. Like, he's 63 years old. It's been 50 years since he was expelled. The Gryffindors head to the Gryffindor common room, and the password this year is Fortuna Major. To get into the Gryffindor common room, there is a painting guarded by the Fat Lady. That's her name, and you have to give her the password, and then she will swing open and you can enter the Gryffindor common room. As they're all headed to the common room, they again pass Malfoy and the Slytherins, and Malfoy makes some sort of swooning motion. He's making fun of Harry for fainting, and Fred and George are like, was Malfoy just making fun of you for being scared of the Dementors? Malfoy came running into our compartment terrified. Looked like he nearly wet himself. And George says, remember when Dad had to go to Azkaban? He came back all shaky, said it was the worst place in the world. Fred and George say, don't let Malfoy get you down, right? When you actually face each other, whether it's in Magic or in Quidditch match, you clearly come out the winner. So Fred and George are illuminating for Harry that the only reason Malfoy is intent on bullying Harry or making Harry look and feel small is because Malfoy feels that he is made small by Harry's success or history or talent. And Harry's like, Malfoy, you're obsessed with me. The next morning at breakfast, it's the first day of school. 3rd year schedules are passed around, and Ron glimpses at Hermione's, and he's like, they messed up your schedule. 9 o'clock, divination. 9 o'clock, Muggle studies. 9 o'clock, arithmancy. And he's like, how are you supposed to be in 3 classes at once? And Hermione says, don't be silly. How could anyone be in 3 classes at once? The 3 kids head to their brand new class, Divination. They've never taken it before, and 2 years at Hogwarts has not taught them everything about the castle. The castle moves a lot. It's a castle, so it's not that easy to find exactly what you're looking for. To get to Divination, you have to climb a really tall tower, and Ron's like, there must be a shortcut. We cannot be doing this every day. They sort of get lost amidst that tower, and they end up interacting with another painting. All the paintings in Hogwarts are animated. They're a little bit alive. They seem to have an imprint of whoever was painted in them. So they meet Sir Cadogan, who is funny and seems to be a little bit inept. Sir Cadogan helps them find their way to Divination. Divination is held in what Harry says doesn't look like a classroom at all, but instead looks like a cross between someone's attic and an old-fashioned tea shop. You know, honestly, it sounds like a cozy, nice, warm environment to maybe read, but kind of a challenging environment to maybe study or have discussion in. Trelawney introduces herself, says, how nice to see you in the physical world at last. She says, maybe you haven't seen me around the castle. I tend to like to keep to myself. And it says, nobody said anything to this extraordinary pronouncement. It's like, whoa. She tells the students that they have chosen to study divination because if you'll remember, last year the students got to choose which sort of extracurricular topics they wanted to cover. Apparently, one of the most challenging of the magical arts. Sybil Trelawney says that you won't find the answers in books here. Trelawney says, many witches and wizards have tried and failed at this majestic art of divination, and talented though they are in the area of loud bangs and smells and sudden disappearings, are yet unable to penetrate the veiled mysteries of the future. So she tells them their course schedule. They'll be starting with tea leaves, and then they'll move to palmistry, and eventually they'll end with crystal balls. While she's doing this sort of like syllabus overview, she's making predictions for students. So she looks at Pravarti Patil and says, beware a red-haired haired man. And she looks at Ron and is like, some people have drawn a connection between that and Goblet of Fire. I don't buy it. I actually think that's the only sort of prophetic thing that Trelawney says that doesn't come to fruition. But think what you want. She says around Easter, one of our number will leave us forever. She tells Lavender Brown that the incident she is dreading will happen on Friday, the 16th of October. She tells Neville that he's going to break a cup, and then he ends up breaking a cup. And then she sets the kids off to drink their tea and interpret their tea leaves on page whatever of Unfogging the Future, which, like, I guess the understanding is, right, like, you drink your tea, this is no longer tea, but you drink your tea and the leaves, your talent for the thing would come in your brain's ability to understand what the leaves had made. But if you didn't have the gift, you wouldn't be able to interpret the symbol, and thus you wouldn't be able to find the correlating meaning or whatever. So Harry and Ron are reading each other's tea leaves. Harry tells Ron that he's going to have trials and suffering, but he's going to be happy about it. They give that line to Ron in the movie, and we're going to talk about the character assassination of Ron Weasley. And I will say, this is a beautiful movie. I personally feel it's a very well done movie, but I don't think it's the most amazing adaptation of a book, of this book. There's a lot in there that is done in a way that I think a lot of the fandom was disappointed about. I speak for myself, but the main thing, my main problem with it is not what the werewolf looks like. It's not that Sirius is supposed to be hot. It's that Ron's character is assassinated in The Prisoner of Azkaban. Anyway, Trelawney comes over to Harry and interprets his tea leaves, that there's a falcon in his tea leaf, and that indicates that he has a deadly enemy. And Hermione says, but everybody knows that. Harry and Ron look at her because they're like, Hermione doesn't usually regard teachers this way. She usually has a pretty profound respect for teachers. She's like turning the cup and she's like looking at it, and then she's like, oh no, it's kinder not to say. Don't ask me. And then she says, you have the Grim. The Grim is apparently the worst omen, a death omen. The Grim is a giant black dog. And Harry's like, oh my God. And he's thinking of the death omen on the cover of Flourish and Blots. He's thinking of the giant black dog he saw in Magnolia Crescent. And Hermione's defending Harry because she's recognizing what's going on as a real abuse of power. This is a person that says they can see the future and is insisting to Harry, who again has this ridiculous trauma history and has been through more than what most adults go through an entire lifetime at the age of 13. And Hermione's saying, one, that's not cool or fair of you to say. Two, and how do you know? Right? And as Hermione is challenging Trelawney, in the way that like some teachers do, starts to put down Hermione. She says, forgive me for saying so, dear, but I perceive very little aura around you. As it relates to JKR making contradictory points, Divination, Sybil Trelawney is clearly supposed to be a bit of a farce. Our most respected characters think that Trelawney is a fake. And yet, Trelawney is actually responsible for at least 2 correct prophecies by the end of this book. JKR is clearly demonstrating that Trelawney is a hack, and yet she's not always a hack. And more than that, I don't know what JKR is trying to say about future telling or divination in general, but when Hermione makes guesses, she's typically accurate. She typically does have access to some sort of intuition that allows her to know things before she has any evidence for them. Same thing with Harry. When Harry attempts to engage with the future, even when he's making it up and intentionally lying, he tends to be correct. So is JKR remarking on the art of divination, or is she remarking on Sybil Trelawney, the artist, who is apparently the great-great-great-granddaughter of Cassandra? So I don't know, like she's making a few different points at once, and I respect that, right? What's going on in this book was risky. This is the 3rd book in the series, and the 4th book is when things really take off, like we really jump in page number. But in this book, for her to engage with the time travel element, the animagus element, it's just brave. I think it was brave. So everyone is looking at Harry's tea leaves and trying to decide if they can also see a Grim. And Harry's like, okay, well, when you're all finished deciding whether or not I'm gonna die, like, can you guys like fuck off? Class ends shortly after that, and they head to Transfiguration, which is taught by Professor McGonagall. And she transforms into a cat in front of them, right? It's at the top of the page on the first day of school. JKR reminds you, wizards can turn into animals. No one in the class is paying any attention to McGonagall, and she's like, hey, not that it matters, but that's the first time me turning into a cat hasn't warranted like a round of applause. So like Hermione's like, sorry, we just came from divination. And she's like, there's no need to say anymore Granger, who of you will be dying this year? And eventually Harry says, me. And she says, then you should know, Potter. Sybil Trelawney has predicted the death of at least one student since she started here at Hogwarts. Why is she allowed to do that? Why hasn't anyone talked to her about that? And none of those students have died. You look in excellent health to me, Potter. You'll excuse me if I don't let you off homework today. I assure you that if you die, you need not hand it in. And that makes Harry feel a lot better. The Trelawney stands in the book are Pavarti Patil and Lavender Brown. And Lavender Brown whispers, but what about Neville's cup? And again, I think it's interesting, and I think it says a lot about JKR and the way that she views the world. Right after the Lockhart fangirl situation, we have an immediate echo of that in Trelawney. Like, come on. Like, later, Ron says, well, Harry, you haven't seen any, giant black dogs, have you? And Harry says, like, yeah, actually I have, the night I left the Dursleys. Ron's like, what? And Hermione's like, probably a stray. And Ron's like, what about all the people that die right after they see the Grim? Like, you can't just discount this information. And Hermione's like, maybe Harry didn't keel over and die because he didn't know it was a death omen. So he wasn't dumb enough to think, okay, I guess I'll kick the bucket then. And she's like, and you didn't seem quite so confident that that was the Grim when you were telling Harry it was a sheep. So she's making points. Right? And Ron's like, you just don't like being bad at something for a change. And it seems he touches a nerve. And then Hermione says, you know what? She's going to do her arithmancy homework. Arithmancy? I think it's arithmancy. But I know, here's the thing. I am originally Canadian, but I was mostly raised in the United States. And I have also spent some time abroad. So I have a weird accent, and I'm also a reader. So I'm pronouncing the words the way I pronounce them in my head. And I know that rubs something. I agree. When someone says my favorite character's name wrong, I'm like, that's not my character. Hermione says she's going to do her arithmancy homework, and Ron says, what is she talking about? She hasn't even been to arithmancy yet. The two of them aren't speaking to each other when they head down to Hagrid's hut for their first Care of Magical Creatures class. Hagrid asks all of his students kind of nervously to open their books, and Draco's like, how? Hasn't anyone been able to open their books? He says, you've got to stroke them. You've got to be nice to them. As if it's the most obvious thing in the world. And he like senses the disgruntled mood amongst the teenagers. He looks at Hermione and is like, I thought they were funny. My heart. It's breaking. So you've got your books, and now you need the magical creatures, so I'll go get them. And then he brings out a dozen of apparently the most bizarre creatures Harry has ever seen. A dozen hippogriffs, which have ultimately the back body of a horse, but the front legs and the head and the wings of an eagle. Harry says once you get over the shock of seeing something that is half horse and half bird, you can start to appreciate the hippogriffs' gleaming coats. Some of them are stormy grays, pinkish roan, gleaming chestnut. Hagrid tells us that hippogriffs are easily offended. Don't ever insult one because it might be the last thing that you do. He says to approach a hippogriff, you first have to bow, and if the hippogriff bows back, then you can engage with the hippogriff. But if not, the hippogriff has decided you are unworthy and you should back away. So he pulls one of the gray hippogriffs toward the class. Harry is sort of voluntold to go first. Harry bows to the hippogriff, and the hippogriff just looks at him for a second, but then it bows back. Hagrid puts Harry on top of the hippogriff, and the hippogriff flies a small circle just around the paddock and then heads back down to the ground. Hagrid unties the rest of the hippogriffs, and the other students go to greet them. They all do their bows, and they're all getting to interact with and pet these magical beasts. Malfoy is looking pretty disdainful. He's pretty annoyed about the whole hippogriff situation, probably just because the class is being taught by Hagrid, and he's prejudiced toward giants, but he also knows Hagrid is Harry's friend, and he's also just kind of a dick. So, I bet you're not dangerous at all, are you? You great ugly brute. And so the hippogriff, with its talons, scratches Malfoy, and Malfoy falls to the ground and lets out a high-pitched scream. This is the guy who was making fun of Harry for fainting. This guy's writhing and screaming on the ground. And Hagrid gets Buckbeak in order and immediately picks up Malfoy and takes him to Madame Pomfrey. Malfoy's yelling I'm dying, I'm dying. The movie really changes this scene. I think it portrays Hagrid as less capable, less responsible than who he is in the book. For one, obviously the assignment is not the problem. It's Malfoy that's the problem. This is why we can't have nice things. Two, in the movie, it's Hermione that says, Hagrid, he needs to be brought to the hospital wing. It's Hermione that's able to act in the face of the panic, and that's not what happens in the book. In the book, Hagrid knows exactly what he's doing and he takes the kid up to the hospital wing. And I gotta imagine children get hurt in these classes, right? Just with the things in Greenhouse 3 alone. I think the way that the movie changes it, it makes it out to look like Hagrid introducing the kids to hippogriffs is a bigger blunder than it actually is. The Slytherins are saying that Hagrid should be fired right away. Dean Thomas says it was obviously Malfoy's fault. Ron is just worried because he's like, that was a really bad thing to happen in Hagrid's like first class, wasn't it? That night, the kids see a light on in Hagrid's window and they decide to walk down to his hut. They get to Hagrid's house and it's very clear that he has been drinking for a long time and drinking a lot. He's like, I suspect it's a record, getting fired on the first day. And they're like, was Malfoy okay? And he says, Madame Pomfrey fixed up Malfoy best as she could, but he's still moaning, covered in bandages, says he's in agony. And Harry's like, she literally grew my bones back last year. He's obviously faking it. And Hagrid's like, they told me I should have left hippogriffs for later, done flubberworms or summit. He's like, I just thought it would make a good first lesson. It's all my fault. And Hermione's like, no, it's Malfoy's fault. Then Hermione has to take Hagrid's drink from him and like pour it out. And Hagrid like goes outside and like dumps his head in a bucket of water. And I think this is maybe like British culture. It's pretty jarring to read as an adult that 13-year-old Hermione is like removing alcohol from the hands of her professor. It's just a little weird. Could be cultural ignorance on my end. Once he dunks his head in water, he sobers up a little bit and he's like, oh my God, what are you guys doing down here? You should not be walking across the grounds after dark. I'm taking you back to the castle right now. I'm not worth this. Do not come to see me again. Over the next few weeks, Malfoy is walking around the school like with his arm in a sling. We see the purebloods who are always talking about being the strongest be very, very weak, unimpressive, cowardly. In potions, Malfoy is insisting that he can't do the work he's supposed to be doing, and Snape makes Ron cut up they need some sort of root for their potion, and Snape asks Ron to cut up Malfoy's potion, so Ron's like, kind of like hastily cutting up the roots. And Malfoy says, Professor, Weasley's mutilating my roots, sir. Weasley, give Malfoy your roots. Ron had spent the last quarter of an hour carefully shredding his own roots into exactly equal pieces, and potions is a very precise magic. I think we could understand it as science. And so now he's like gonna get a worse grade because Malfoy gets his roots. Then Snape says, Potter, you can skin Malfoy's shrivel fig. I mean, in potions, Malfoy is bragging about how his dad has a lot of influence because Malfoy sustained a lasting injury like this. Hagrid's undoubtedly going to be fired. His dad's complained to the school governors, and they're trying to get Buckbeak executed for his violence against students. At that same time, Snape sees Neville's potion, and it's orange, and it's not supposed to be orange. And Snape says, tell me, boy, does anything penetrate that thick skull of yours? Which is just not the way the teachers should talk to students. We know the data is in. There's science that proves your self-talk. The brain does seem to have a lot to do with endurance. And so if Neville has been told his whole life, like we've seen him be bullied by his grandmother, he's using his father's wand, which is probably impacting his ability to do magic. And we know that he has been bullied and threatened by this professor particularly since he got to school. I think probably Snape hates Neville for some of the same reasons he hates Harry. If the Dark Lord had decided that Neville was the boy from the prophecy, perhaps Lily would be alive. I'm sure there's something inside of that. But the way he's talking to Neville, it's really inexcusable, I think. The kids are supposed to be making a shrinking potion, and Snape says, here's what we're going to do. At the end of class, we're going to feed your toad, your pet, some of your shrinking potion. And if you've done it right, he'll change into a tadpole, and then we'll change him back. But if you've done it wrong, I suspect he'll die. So as a teacher, not only refusing to teach this student because you don't believe them adept enough, he's in a position of power and authority over an extremely vulnerable child. And we will spend time discussing Snape's suffering, of which he has endured much. It's not to diminish what he's been through. Having an origin story does not excuse the harm that you do. I actually think that's the point of Snape's story. I personally understand his role in these books to be a sort of penance for the damage that he's caused. So for him to be continuing to perpetuate harm, I know that he's playing double agent. He doesn't have to be fostering the learning of this child or even being kind to the Gryffindors to not be bullying them and threatening their pets with death. And like like, Neville believes he's a squib. This boy is terrified all the time. Anyway, Snape says Hermione's not allowed to help Neville, but she's muttering instructions under her breath out of the corner of her mouth so that Snape won't see. While that's going on and Neville's trying to correct his potion, Malfoy taunts Harry. He says, "Are you thinking about going after Black, Potter?" And Harry's like, "Why would I go after Sirius Black?" And Malfoy's like, "If it was me, I'd want revenge." And Harry's like, "But he hasn't done anything to me yet." And statistically, Harry faces Voldemort about once a year, so he's constantly in waiting mode. Like, he's literally always waiting for someone to make an attempt on his life. So he's not scared. He's just a little bit befuddled. Potions class comes to an end, and Trevor the Toad is used as a guinea pig with this potion, and he does in fact shrink into the size of a tadpole. And Snape takes 5 points for Gryffindor because Hermione obviously cheated. But Trevor didn't die. So that's good. As they leave class, Ron is pissed about Snape and he turns to say something to Hermione and she's disappeared, which is happening throughout the course of this book. Ron keeps trying to talk to Hermione and then all of a sudden she won't be there. And Harry's not pressed about what's going on with Hermione. Like, Harry's got a lot of other stuff going on. He's just sort of like, I don't know, whatever. Hermione's bag is packed with at least a dozen large and heavy books. And Ron's like, "But you haven't even got any of these subjects today. Like, why are you carrying all these books around? We only have Defense Against the Dark Arts this afternoon. Why are you so obsessed with me? Like, whatever. What's it to you if I carry my books around?" And Ron says, "Do you get the feeling that Hermione's not telling us something?" And Harry's like, Harry Potter and the one where Ron notices everything and nobody else does. They get to Defense Against the Dark Arts. It's their first class with Professor Lupin. They're not going to need their books today, but they will need their wands. Today's lesson will be a practical one, and they've never had a practical Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson, so they're pretty excited. They aren't going to be practicing in the classroom. They have to go somewhere else, and so Lupin is walking the students down the hallway when they run into the school poltergeist, Peeves, and Peeves is singing a song about Lupin, and Lupin is able to cast a spell that makes Peeves go away, and all the students are like immediately impressed because this is the first time they've seen the person in the Defense Against the Dark Arts post do any sort of impressive magic whatsoever. So they're like, "Oh my god, like that worked." Like, the bar is real low. Lupin is leading the class to the staff room, and in the staff room is Professor Snape. And he says to Lupin, "Possibly no one's warned you. This class contains Neville Longbottom. I would advise you not to entrust him with anything difficult." It's like, he's not even in your class right now. Like, to disparage him in front of another teacher, it's just terrible. Today's Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson is about boggarts. Boggarts like dark enclosed spaces. Hermione informs us that a boggart is a shapeshifter. It takes the form of whatever it thinks the viewer will be frightened by most. So a boggart sitting in darkness has not yet assumed its form. It's such a cool way for JKR to be explaining away like the monster under the bed or the monster in the closet or all the scary things that we see in tiny dark spaces. She's saying that, yeah, no, there is actually a creature under your bed. It just isn't the clown that you think it is, right? It's just whatever the boggart thinks will scare you enough to leave it alone so that it can stay in its dark place. Lupin says it's best to have company when you're dealing with a boggart and you're trying to get rid of a boggart because the boggart becomes confused. So he says there's a charm to repel a boggart, but it requires force of mind. That charm is ridiculous. You immediately have an advantage on the boggart. One, you probably know what frightens you most, so have that idea in your mind. And then you're going to think about how to make that thing comical. You're going to reduce the fear of the situation by taking control of it. All the students are tasked with thinking of the thing that scares them most. And initially, Harry does think of Lord Voldemort, but he's defeated Lord Voldemort 3 times, twice in conscious memory. So the next thing he ends up thinking of is the thing that has bested him, the Dementor. Lupin gives special attention to Neville, and Neville says his greatest fear is Snape. So for Neville, whose parents, we're going to talk about Neville's parents, but for Neville's greatest fear, to be Snape is so sad and horrible. But anyway, Lupin guides him. When the boggart steps out of the cabinet, Neville is able to perform magic that turns the boggart into Professor Snape wearing his grandmother's clothes, and they all share some joy at Professor Snape's expense. This changes Neville. He is able to charge down the boggart later because all he needed to be shown was 1, someone believed that he could do it, and 2, he literally could do it. So the class goes around and everyone is interacting with the boggart, turning it into various things. The only 2 students that don't get to interact with the boggart are Hermione and Harry. And it's clear to Harry that right before the boggart comes to him, Lupin interferes and steps in the way. The kids see the boggart turn into a sort of silvery orb, and they're like, I wonder why Professor Lupin's afraid of crystal balls. He tells Neville to finish it off. Neville finishes off the boggart, and it explodes. It's ultimately been their best defense against the dark arts class. Everyone's really excited about it because they got to practice magic, and they successfully now know how to ward off something in the dark arts. They have not been taught a single thing in their previous 2 years, but Harry's a little bit embarrassed, and he's wondering if anyone else notices that Lupin interfered with him engaging with the boggart. He thinks that means that Lupin thinks he's weak, which he doesn't. Also, as they're leaving class, Malfoy is disparaging Lupin, even though everyone else was like, this was undoubtedly the best lesson we've ever had, because he's talking about the state of Lupin's robes. He says he dresses like our old house elf. And to really emphasize how horrible this is, Malfoy has just said his teacher dresses like his slave. So it's disrespectful and despicable on a number of fronts. Happenings at Hogwarts. Snape is in a particularly vindictive mood, and his bullying has gotten worse than ever because he heard about the boggart incident. Every time Harry goes to divination class, when Professor Trelawney looks at him, her eyes fill with tears because of this prophetic warning that Harry's going to die an early death. Pavarti and Lavender have taken to haunting Professor Trelawney's classroom, and they always return with annoying, superior looks on their faces. Hagrid, in Care of Magical Creatures, seems to have lost his confidence, and now every day when the students go to class, their lesson is just looking after flubberworms, and I guess flubberworms only eat lettuce, so they just sit there poking lettuce down the flubberworms' throats for their class, and it's really boring. Quidditch season is approaching, and Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor team and 7th year at Hogwarts, is raring and ready and terrified to get this Quidditch season on the road. So he's like, this is our last chance. My last chance to win the Quidditch Cup. He's like, we've had the worst luck in the world, injuries, and honestly, all of that luck has to do with Harry and his encounters with the Dark Lord, so Harry feels weird about that. But Oliver's like, I know we have the best damn team in this entire school. There's no reason that the cup shouldn't be ours. And Fred and George are like, it's okay, Oliver, this is our year. The first Hogsmead visit quickly approaches, and all the third years are going. Harry's the only one that's going to be left behind, and so Ron encourages Harry to ask Professor McGonagall to sign his slip. He says his aunt and uncle forgot to sign his form, but he figures if she could sign it, it might be okay. They're muggles. They don't really understand about what Hogsmead is, and she looks at him with what he considers an odd expression on her face. Was it pity? McGonagall particularly is aware of who the Dursleys are because she observed them for just one day, the day that Harry was dropped off there, and found them to be so terrible that she couldn't believe that Dumbledore was leaving this child in their care. She probably would have signed the form if it weren't for the Sirius Black situation. The form is just a convenient excuse to keep Harry in the castle. That's one of the things that really distinguishes Lupin from the rest of the adults that we've met in the series, is they all give Harry little vague pieces of information, trying to protect him in a sort of ignorance is bliss sort of way. I think it gets Harry in more danger than it would otherwise if they would just tell him. Other things, Crookshanks is often trying to catch Scabbers, Ron's rat. Ron notices that Crookshanks seems to actually have it out for Scabbers, and Hermione's like, no, all cats chase rats, Ron. Ron seems to think that Crookshanks can understand when they're talking about Scabbers. Ron believes that Crookshanks is actually targeting Scabbers. That drives a further wedge between Ron and Hermione in this book. Later, before the Hogsmeade trip, Lavender Brown is crying. It's the 16th of October, and she's just gotten word that her rabbit, Binky, has been killed by a fox. And everyone's like, oh my god, Trelawney told you something was going to happen on the 16th of October. Is this the thing you were dreading? Of course I was dreading it. I don't want my animal to die. Hermione's like, well, was Binky an old rabbit? Did you think he was going to die? Well, no. Hermione's like, well, then why would you be dreading him dying? Obviously, Hermione has never grappled with existential dread. And she's like, you can't have been dreading it if this is coming as a real shock. And Ron's like, don't mind Hermione Lavender. She doesn't think other people's pets are important. Everyone's trying to make Harry feel better about the fact that he can't go to Hogsmeade. This is a really cool, exciting trip. They assure him that they're going to bring him lots of sweets back from Honeydukes. They'll tell him all about it, but Harry's just going to like sit in the castle with all the other first and second years. Harry's like, maybe I'll do some homework in the library. He's halfway there when he decides that he isn't in the mood for working and wanders back. And he runs into Professor Lupin, who now has a large water tank in his office and is preparing the Grindylow for their next lesson. It's a sort of water demon that the kids are going to learn about. This leads Harry and Lupin to have their first individual conversation where Harry confronts Lupin about his interference, and Lupin says, I assumed it was going to assume the shape of Lord Voldemort, and I imagined that people would panic. And Harry's respect for Lupin increases again because this is an adult that was just flat out honest with him. And Harry said, I did think it was going to be Lord Voldemort, but now I'm really more afraid of the Dementors. That suggests that Harry's biggest fear is fear itself. As they're having this intimate, warm, educational conversation, Snape comes into Lupin's office and he's carrying a goblet which was smoking faintly. He stops at the sight of Harry. I can picture this so clearly. The scene is really well written. Lupin's like, I was just showing Harry my Grindylow. Snape drops off the potion and Harry's like, what is that? Lupin's like, I'm feeling a bit off color. The potion is the only thing that helps. There aren't many wizards who are up to making it. And Harry is like watching Lupin drink it. He's like, Snape's very interested in the defense against the dark arts position. Some people reckon he'd do anything to get it. And Lupin is just like, the empty goblet is still smoking. And Harry's like, oh my god. Because Harry is and will be suspicious of Snape. Like, that suspicion will rise and fall throughout the course of the series, but Snape has proven himself to be aligned with the Slytherins' pureblood ideology. He bullies everyone that Harry cares about. So he's not a friend by any means, which means perhaps he's a foe. Hermione's like, well, if Snape was going to poison Lupin, I doubt he would do it with Harry there. Most of the Gryffindors are making their way back to the common room, but they get stopped at the door. Nobody's going in. Percy is like, what's the holdup here? I'm head boy, let me through. They arrive at the porthole to see that somebody has slashed the painting and that the fat lady, it's so weird to call her that. Please know that the lady that guards the portrait hole is missing. Filch says she's ashamed. Why? Doesn't want to be seen. She's a horrible nasty temper he's got, that Sirius Black. And everyone's like, what? Sirius Black slashed the painting? Sirius Black is in the castle? This is terrifying and a really big deal because the castle's supposed to be impenetrable. All the Gryffindor students are told to sit in the dining hall, and 10 minutes later, they're joined by all the Hufflepuffs, Ravenclaws, and Slytherins. All those students are pretty confused. Dumbledore tells them that for their own safety, they'll be spending their night here. He waves his hand and all the tables move to the sides of the wall. He waves his hand again and a bunch of sleeping bags adorn the floor. Hundreds of squashy purple sleeping bags adorn the floor. Famously, while they were shooting this scene, Daniel Radcliffe, the star of this series, Harry Potter, apparently was interested, had a crush on one of the extras. And so he asked if her sleeping bag could be put sort of close to his so he could maybe orchestrate an interaction with her. Daniel Radcliffe, at this point in time, was so Harry-coded. He's literally the star of the series. You do not need plausible deniability to talk to the extra on set. Like, he's intimidated by the extra. It just tells us so much about his heart. Anyway, so when Dumbledore leaves the hall, all the kids begin to chatter excitedly. Sirius Black's in the castle. This is a big deal. This is a scary deal. Dumbledore's on it, and they're all together, so they feel pretty safe. Some students are saying it's lucky he picked tonight, the one night that we weren't in the tower. I wonder how he got in here. Did he apparate? And Hermione's like, honestly, am I the only person that's read Hogwarts a history? And Ron's like, yes. And Hermione tells us that there's all sorts of enchantments on the castle to stop people entering by stealth. You can't just apparate or teleport in here. All the children eventually are supposed to settle down and be quiet, and later in the middle of the night, Harry overhears Snape and Dumbledore talking. They haven't found Sirius Black inside the castle. Dumbledore says he didn't really expect Black to linger. And Snape says, you remember the conversation we had, Headmaster, just before the start of the term? Seems almost impossible that Black could have entered the castle without any help. I did express my concerns when you appointed. And Dumbledore's like, I remember what you said. I don't have the same concerns as you. This breach in security prompts the Ministry of Magic to want the Dementors to enter the Hogwarts castle. But Dumbledore says no Dementor will enter this castle while he is headmaster here. Foreshadowing? Harry looks at Ron and Hermione and sees that their eyes are also open and they also were eavesdropping on the conversation. The fat lady's ripped canvas has been taken off the wall and replaced with a portrait of Sir Cadogan and his fat gray pony. Like, how many times is the word fat? Anyway, so Sir Cadogan is now the person guarding the Gryffindor common room, and he's taking this job really seriously. He comes up with new, ridiculously complicated passwords a few times a day, and this is really challenging for Neville, who had a hard time remembering the one password at the beginning of the year, Fortuna Major. Because of this breach in security, McGonagall calls Harry to her office, and apparently she has such a somber look on her face that it seems as though someone has died. She's going to disclose to Harry that Sirius Black is, in fact, after him, and Harry's like, I already know that. Don't even worry about that. I accidentally heard Arthur tell Molly, and then Arthur told me later, so like, whatever. She says, well, I'm really sorry to tell you that when you're out there on the Quidditch pitch, you're pretty exposed, so I don't think you can play Quidditch anymore. Are you kidding me? Like, I have to train, Professor. McGonagall's also really invested in the success of Gryffindor's Quidditch team, so she says she'd be happier if a teacher was present, so now Madam Hooch will oversee all of their training sessions. The first match is coming up, and it was supposed to be Gryffindor against Slytherin, but Slytherin is playing the injury card and saying that their seeker is still too hurt to play. So now, even though they've been training themselves to play against Slytherin's tactics, moves, brooms, team, whatever, they'll now be playing Hufflepuff. Hufflepuff has a new captain and seeker, Cedric Diggory. This elicits giggles from the girls on the Gryffindor team. Angelina says he's the tall, good-looking one, isn't he? Strong and silent. The boys are like, I don't know why you're worried, Oliver. Hufflepuff is a pushover. Hufflepuffs really aren't represented in the movies, and so they've kind of been slandered, I'd say, in the fandom that knows a little bit less. In Philosopher's Stone, in the Sorting Hat's song, we hear the Sorting Hat say that Hufflepuffs believe in hard work, like toil, and loyalty. Hufflepuffs are by no means pushovers. They just believe in harmony. But they do work really hard, and they are successful wizards. Wood admonishes them. He's like, no, Diggory has put a really strong side together, and he's an excellent seeker, and I worried that you were gonna respond this way. Days later, when the kids go to Defense Against the Dark Arts, they don't find Professor Lupin at his desk. Instead, they find Snape, who's substituting for Professor Lupin. He says he's ill, and Harry's like, what's wrong with him? Because Harry's like, did you goddamn poison our teacher? And Snape says, nothing life-threatening. Sit down. Turn to page 394. I can't do it. Alan Rickman can do it. He's ignoring Hermione, whose hand has been in the air because she's prepared to tell them where they're at in the syllabus. Snape says, be quiet. I did not ask you for information. This is one of at least 5 times that Snape is going to tell Hermione to shut up. Snape is being very disparaging toward Lupin, rifling through his already graded papers, insisting that something that Lupin gave an 8 out of 10, he would give a 3 out of 10. The Gryffindor students come to his aid, saying that Lupin is the best Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher they've ever had. Meanwhile, Snape is saying that this group of third years is clearly super ill prepared, and we know that because they haven't had a teacher for the last 2 years, but they do now. He tells the class to turn to page 394 of their textbook, which is way deeper into the textbook than they are prepared for. Snape asks them which of them can tell the difference between a werewolf and a true wolf, which establishes for us immediately that a werewolf and a true wolf are supposed to look very similar. Hermione's hand is raised, as it usually is, and Snape is refusing to call on her. He's saying, like, anyone? Well, I never thought I'd meet a third-year class who couldn't even recognize a werewolf when they saw one. And Hermione eventually ends up enlightening him. A werewolf is apparently infected. A werewolf is bitten and then has some sort of blood-borne pathogen that leads them to turn into a wolf without any sort of intention or control on the evening of a full moon or in the light of the full moon. Then that wolf becomes a danger to themselves and everyone else. A werewolf won't recognize his best friend in wolf form. We also learned that really the only visible difference between a werewolf and a true wolf is that a werewolf has a longer snout or something. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of people had a problem with the depiction of the werewolf in the movie version, because that does not look like a wolf. It's a lot scarier. I think it's really scary, but I think the point is that it's supposed to look like an animal. Whatever. He's supposed to look like an animal. Anyway, Hermione gives him this very concise, articulate, and educated answer, and Snape takes 5 points from Gryffindor for Hermione being an insufferable know-it-all. She looks down and her eyes are filled with tears. Ron shouts at Snape, "You asked us a question and she knows the answer. Why did you ask if you didn't want to be told?" And that's very different than Ron's response in the movie. In the movie, Ron agrees with Snape, says something along the lines of like, well, somebody had to say it. To have it be opposite ends of the spectrum. Ron gets detention for saying this, and his detention is cleaning bedpans in the hospital wing. Like, that's a pretty intense detention. Versus the other side, where he whispers his agreement with Snape. The movie is doing something. It cannot handle two strong male protagonists, I guess, so they have to make Ron look worse than who he is in the book. And it does that on a couple different fronts. Snape assigns them all an essay on the ways to recognize and subsequently kill a werewolf that's due on Monday. And everyone's pretty upset about this. One, because Snape is a substitute teacher. He shouldn't be allowed to assign homework. Two, this content and material is far more advanced than where they're at in the current curriculum. And three, it's Quidditch this weekend. Who has time to write this essay? Quidditch Day is like horrible, horrible weather. The worst weather we've ever seen in the book. It's extreme winds, extreme rain, extreme clouds, but Quidditch perseveres. They push forward anyway. Oliver Wood typically gives his team an impassioned speech before they head onto the field, but he's so nervous today that he can't even talk. He opens his mouth to say something a few times, but eventually just closes it and they head out. Cedric Diggory smiles at Wood, ever the sportsman. Wood is like unable to smile. He's just like that tense. Anyway, throughout the game, Harry can't hear Lee Jordan's commentary over the wind. Twice, he nearly flies into another player that he can't identify if they're on his team or the other team because he literally can't see. The rain is pelting his glasses. Eventually, Wood calls for a timeout. Gryffindor is 50 points up, but unless they get the snitch soon, they'll be playing into the night. So Wood's basically like, Harry, where are you? Hermione comes down onto the field and she enchants Harry's glasses to be impervious to rain. So now he can see. He's still really cold and very, very wet, but he can see. Harry is zooming around on the field looking for the snitch. Harry looks up to the top of the stands and sees an enormous black dog again. This throws Harry off his game a little bit because he thinks it's a death omen. He thinks it's the Grim. He turns and sees Diggory chasing the snitch. Before Harry can head that way, he looks down and sees nearly 100 Dementors. 100 Dementors underneath him, all looking up at him. Terrifying. That, of course, causes this reaction inside of his body. He feels very cold and he hears the screaming of his mother. And Harry's thinking she needs help. She's going to be murdered. Like, he loses himself inside of his memory, inside of his trauma. And when he passes out, he falls off his broom. Harry wakes up in the hospital wing, surrounded by Fred, George, and Ron. He says his whole body is aching as if he's been beaten. They tell him that he fell off. Must have been 50 feet. Everyone thought he died. Harry's like, we didn't lose, did we? And they say, yeah, Diggory got the snitch. Once he saw what had happened and that there had been Dementor interference, Diggory tried to call it off, but he hadn't noticed the Dementors or Harry falling until he caught the snitch, so technically the win is solidified. So this demonstrates for us Cedric Diggory's sportsmanship. It doesn't feel like a real win. He didn't actually beat Harry Potter. It was just circumstance, really. Harry feels horrible, right? Like, this loss is basically on him. The rest of the team did their job. They were 50 points up. George says, there had to be one you didn't get, Harry. It's the first time you haven't caught the snitch. And they say, if Hufflepuff loses to Ravenclaw and we beat Ravenclaw and Slytherin, we're still contenders for the cup. So because the point system is so important in Quidditch, it's not just about wins and losses, it's about points acquired. Even though Hufflepuff beat Gryffindor, if things go their way in the other games and certain people beat other people, Gryffindor may still be in line for the cup. That means that their participation is contingent on other people's losses, which makes it out of their control. It all depends on points. But this is the first ever Quidditch match that Harry has played in and lost. He's been playing for 2 years, so like, it's a pretty impressive record. They tell him that when Harry fell off his broom, Dumbledore came out onto the field, waved his wand, and sort of caught Harry mid-air. Then he magicked Harry onto a stretcher and sent the Dementors away. Did someone get my Nimbus? And they say, oh, Harry, it hit the Whomping Willow. The Whomping Willow is a really violent tree on the Hogwarts grounds, and it tends to fight back. So they hand Harry his Nimbus 2000 in pieces. Harry's very, very upset about this. He says it feels like losing a dear friend. Jenny Weasley brings a get well soon card, and eventually Wood comes up to comfort Harry and in a really deadpan voice says it's not his fault and he understands there's nothing he could do. He didn't blame him in the slightest. Harry says he hasn't told anyone about the Grim, not even Ron or Hermione, because he knows Ron would panic and Hermione would scoff, and he feels sick and humiliated every time he thinks of the Dementors. He's really upset that they're not impacting anyone else the way they're impacting him, and he feels like it's his weakness that had led them to lose this game. He says no one else hears the echoes of their dying parents, and that's like something he uses against himself. It's like, Harry! Anyway, after the weekend, Lupin is back in class, and they say he really does look worse for wear. It seems like he really had been ill. He's smiling though when the class takes their seats. He's clearly glad to be back. The class bursts into an explosion of complaints about Snape, and Lupin's like, well, did you tell Snape you hadn't covered werewolves yet? And they're like, yes, he wouldn't listen, 2 rolls of parchment. Lupin's like, don't worry, I'll talk to Snape. You don't have to do the essay. And Hermione's like, but I've already finished it. Harry confides in Lupin about his nimbus being broken by the Whomping Willow, and Lupin says that the willow was actually planted the same year that he came to Hogwarts, and he tells Harry that him passing out has absolutely nothing to do with weakness. The Dementors affect Harry worse because of the significance of his trauma history. So Dementors are kind of like a little bit of a contradiction in themselves. They infest the darkest, filthiest places. They glory in decay and despair. They drain peace, hope, and happiness out of the air around them because they're eating it. They eat peace, hope, and happiness, and they leave whoever else is in the space left with nothing but the worst experiences in their life. Somewhere like Azkaban is completely drained of hope and happiness. But if they're eating hope and happiness, that does mean they eventually run out of supplies. Like, wouldn't it be in the Dementors' best interest to breed hope and happiness so that they'd have more to eat? I don't know. Anyway, they're a contradiction. Lupin explains that because Dumbledore won't let them into the school, the Dementors must be kind of hungry. Their human supply has dried up. The Quidditch match would have looked like an absolute feast to them with emotions running so high. Lupin explains that Dementors are really feared creatures, and that's why they guard Azkaban. And Harry says, well, Sirius Black escaped them. And Lupin's briefcase slips from his desk at the mention of Sirius Black. And Harry says, well, maybe you could help me fight them. Sirius Black escaped has given Harry a sort of hope that he'll be able to conquer the Dementors too. And Lupin says, I don't pretend to be an expert in fighting Dementors, Harry, quite the opposite. But Lupin agrees to help him try. He can't try today, he's too ill. They'll start next semester. So Harry has this renewed energy, buoyed by the fact that he may never have to hear his mother's death again, and that Ravenclaw flattened Hufflepuff in their Quidditch match at the end of November means that they're back in the cup, and Harry has a way to fight the big scary thing in his life. Harry and Hermione are staying at Hogwarts over Christmas. This isn't something that many students do, and Harry knows that they're doing it just to keep him company. Why doesn't he just go to the Weasleys? Why don't they all go to the Weasleys? Before the holidays start, though, there's another visit to Hogsmeade, and Harry obviously can't go. He intends to spend that time browsing through Witch Broomstick, a copy of which he got from Wood. He has to buy a new broomstick now, and he doesn't know which one he's gonna buy. The Nimbus 2000 was given to him by McGonagall, which is crazy, and he knows the stick he actually wants is the Firebolt, but no one can afford that. And he's definitely not gonna buy anything that Malfoy thinks is good, and that's the Nimbus 2001, so he's kind of in this in-between place broomstick-wise. For practice, he's riding an ancient shooting star, which is very slow and jerky. While the rest of his friends go to Hogsmeade, Harry is on his way to read Witch Broomstick when he runs into Fred and George, and they give him an early Christmas present. They give him the Marauders map. It's this large, square, blank piece of old parchment. We nicked this from Filch, we couldn't help but notice it sticking out of a drawer, labeled confiscated and highly dangerous. And Harry's looking at the parchment, it's just an old piece of paper, and is like, you're winding me up. They tap the parchment, and they say, I solemnly swear I'm up to no good. A message appears. Purveyors of aids to magical mischief makers are proud to present the Marauders map. On that map, Fred and George illuminate for Harry that there are multiple different secret tunnels that can help one enter or exit Hogwarts without anybody knowing. They said they've explored the whole map. Something else that the map does is label everything, everyone, every happening on the Hogwarts grounds. So they point to Dumbledore's office where they can see a figure labeled Albus Dumbledore pacing. And they're like, yeah, he does that a lot. They can see what everyone's doing, where everyone is, all the time. So if Fred and George ever looked at the Marauders map and looked at the Gryffindor common room, Wouldn't they have seen somebody else in Ron's bed? Were they just not worried about it? Or so they point out the different entrances. They tell him that these two are blocked off. They say that there's one that goes underneath the Whomping Willow, but they've never been able to get in or out of it, so they don't think it really works. And then there's this other one by this witch's hump that leads right into the cellar of Honeydukes, the sweet shop in Hogsmead. Here, you need this map more than us now. When you're done with it, make sure you tap it and say mischief managed, and then it'll go blank. Otherwise, anyone can read it. Harry worries for a second. He remembers Mr. Weasley's warning to Ginny that you should never trust anything if you can't see where it keeps its brain. But then he thinks if Fred and George have been using it for years, it's probably no big. Harry's also feeling a little bit ambivalent about using the map because there is a reason he's not supposed to be going to Hogsmeade. This isn't a punishment. It's because the entirety of the magical world is trying to keep Harry safe, and that means keeping him in the castle. But he goes anyway. So, at that moment, he goes up to the witch's hump. A little speech bubble pops up on the map that says Descendium, and he taps the thing. He goes into the tunnel. He folds the map into his robes, and he sets off for Hogsmeade for the first time. He says he feels like he walks through the passage for an hour, and then he has to climb 100, 200. He loses count of the steps he's climbing into the Honeyduke cellar. He eventually gets to the cellar, makes his way past the crates, and arrives in Honeyduke's, which is just bursting with so many Hogwarts students that no one even notices that Harry's there. Harry comes to talk to Ron and Hermione, and Ron's like, wow, you learned to apparate. He tells them about the map, and Ron's like, why didn't they ever give it to me? I'm their brother. Hermione's like, what about Sirius Black? What if Black had known the passage was there? What if Black had been in that passage hiding out? Shouldn't you give this to Dumbledore? Why? Are you going to report me? She doesn't say anything at that moment in time. Harry gets to explore Hogsmeade. He says it looks like a Christmas card. It's covered in snow. They take Harry to the Three Broomsticks for the first time. Ron offers to go purchase the butterbeer with Madame Rose Murta, who apparently is super hot, which is like a little bit alcoholic. My understanding is that it's like a sort of cider. When all of a sudden, who enters the Three Broomsticks but Professor McGonagall, Flitwick, and Hagrid, followed by Cornelius Fudge, Minister of Magic. Ron and Hermione immediately push Harry under the table, and Hermione casts a spell to move the Christmas tree in front of their table so that Hagrid doesn't notice the other two. Harry overhears a conversation that I personally believe undoubtedly should have been information that was shared with him immediately after Black's escape. But whatever. They're having a conversation about how it was so unlikely and surprising that Sirius Black went to the dark side, especially because his best friend was James Potter. Sirius Black and James Potter were best friends for their entire Hogwarts education. They were the ringleaders of their little gang. They were both very bright and extreme troublemakers, even that could rival Fred and George. Sirius Black was even the best man at James and Lily's wedding. They named him Godfather to Harry. When it became clear that Voldemort was targeting the Potters, Dumbledore told the Potters that their best chance was a Fidelis charm. It's an immensely complex spell involving the magical concealment of a secret inside of a single living soul. Apparently, Voldemort could have searched the entirety of the village and never found Lily and James unless that secret keeper decides to divulge the secret. At that point in time, Dumbledore and the rest of the Order were pretty sure that someone in their inner circle was slipping secrets to Lord Voldemort. They just didn't know who that someone was. The Potters named Sirius Black their secret keeper, and thus the only reason that Harry's parents are dead is because Sirius Black sold them out to Voldemort. Sirius Black betrayed the Potters, and that's why they're dead. That's why Harry's been an orphan. Hagrid says that he met Sirius Black. In fact, must have been the last person to see him before he killed those muggles. Hagrid says he hadn't known that Black was his secret keeper. He even comforted the murdering traitor. Sirius said, "Give Harry to me, Hagrid. I'm his godfather." But Hagrid had orders from Dumbledore, and so Sirius gave Hagrid his motorcycle. Take the baby to where Dumbledore wants him to go. So that's why Hagrid arrives on Sirius Black's motorcycle on the night of Harry's parents' death. It wasn't the Ministry of Magic that found Sirius Black. It was, in fact, Peter Pettigrew, the other boy, the fourth boy in their little gang. McGonagall says Pettigrew, that fat little boy who was always tagging around after them at Hogwarts. And like, you can see what I'm saying, right? Like the word fat in itself is not a bad word. It's just being used in sort of a disparaging way. The word fat is never used with characters that we're supposed to like or respect. And that's really the problem. That's what makes it fat-phobic. Anyway, Fudge says, hey, like, don't speak ill of the dead. Pettigrew died a hero's death. Eyewitnesses everywhere saw Sirius Black blast a crater into the middle of the street, killing 12 muggles and Pettigrew. There was nothing left of Pettigrew except his finger. They say the murder of Pettigrew and all those muggles was the action of a cornered and desperate man. Cruel and pointless. It says it speaks to Black's character, even though that's not who they saw him to be at school at all. And at the time when all of this happened, all of these people were 21. Like, they were very much young. Like, if we're gonna say that Snape isn't an adult because he's like 34, these people were not adults. All of this happened when James and Lily were 21 years old. Fudge says over the summer holiday, he actually saw Black in Azkaban right before he escaped. He said Sirius Black seemed quite rational to him, and he asked Cornelius Fudge if he'd finished his newspaper. Harry is listening to all of this under the table in like a crowded pub and is like, oh my god, he's just been given such intense information. One, he has a godfather. Two, that godfather betrayed his parents. He learns that his godfather was his parents' most trusted ally and he betrayed them, and that's why Harry's life has been as bleak and as dark as it is. Harry doesn't even really remember the return trip back from Hogsmead. He makes his way back to the castle. He makes his way up to his dormitory and he pulls out the old photo album that Hagrid had given him in his first year. Each of the boys has a 4-poster bed with like curtains around the side for privacy, so he pulls all the curtains closed because he doesn't want to debrief this with Ron. He just wants to look at these pictures and think. He feels really, really bad. He's upset and he feels betrayed himself because he's like, why has no one ever told me about this? Dumbledore, Hagrid, Mr. Weasley, Cornelius Fudge, like all of these people knew and they kept this information from me, which is why everyone's been hinting that they don't want Harry to go after Black, because it would make sense if he holds Black responsible for the suffering that he's experienced. Harry's looking at the pictures. He sees his father first, beaming, the untidy black hair Harry had inherited standing up in all directions. Then he sees Sirius. His face wasn't sunken and waxy like it is in the newspapers, but handsome, full of laughter. Harry calls Sirius Black handsome twice in this thing. He's like, wow, Sirius is supposed to be super hot. And so the casting of Gary Oldman, listen, like, I like Gary Oldman, and I think he's a good actor. Sirius is supposed to be hot, and Gary Oldman is hot in his own way, but he's not like unequivocally, objectively hot, and that's what Sirius is supposed to be. An unfortunate casting choice, I would say. Just personally. Harry is feeling hatred coursing through his veins like poison. He doesn't sleep well at all that night, and when he gets up the next day, the castle is deserted because it's the first day of holidays. He can tell that Ron and Hermione have clearly discussed how they're going to approach this situation. They're being pretty gentle with Harry, but they're also saying like, you wouldn't go after Black, right? That wouldn't be smart. You'll be careful, right? And Harry's like, you guys clearly don't get it. And they don't. They really don't. They both come from loving, safe homes. They have no idea how Harry feels. And Harry's particularly upset because he's just learned from Fudge that the Dementors didn't have the same impact on Sirius that they had on everyone else, that they had on someone like Hagrid. The Dementors aren't even really punishment for him. He hasn't been punished for this horrible, unforgivable thing that he's done. And Ron's like, please don't go after Black, Harry. You couldn't take him. The only thing they found of Peter Pettigrew, what they sent back to his mom, was his finger in a box, taken on Voldemort. And Ron's like, would you say you know who? Please? And they eventually decide that they'll just go down to Hagrid's today. And Harry wants to go down to Hagrid's because he's prepared to confront Hagrid. He's prepared to be like, hey, what the heck? Like, we're supposed to be friends. Why didn't you tell me? But when they get there, Hagrid has clearly been sobbing. His eyes are red and swollen. There are tears splashing down his face and clothing. Hagrid shows them the letter he's received. The Committee for Disposal of Dangerous Creatures has decided to execute Buckbeak because they think he's a danger to mankind. This is all due to the official complaint registered by Lucius Malfoy. But there is going to be a trial, so Hagrid will get to present Buckbeak's case. And the kids are like, great, well, we'll prepare for the case. And Hagrid's like, you don't know these gargoyles. They really have it out for interesting creatures. Harry says him and Hagrid don't always fall on the same side of the interesting versus dangerous coin. But if you looked at Buckbeak now, he looks like positively cute compared to everything else that Hagrid loves. So Buckbeak is like literally sitting in the hut at that moment. Couldn't leave him all alone outside at Christmas. Hagrid says all of the disposal people are in Lucius's pocket. So it doesn't matter what he says at the trial. The vote's probably already been decided. All the kids promise to do research for this trial. Hermione says she's sure she's read a case about hippogriff baiting. Ron's like, shall I make a cup of tea? Harry's like, what? That's what my mom does when someone feels sad. Hagrid says, I'm just worried about Buckbeak and no one liking my classes. And Hermione's like, we do like them. How are the flubberworms? Dead. Too much lettuce. There's just so much that gets lost if you've only seen the movies. Like, you know what happened if you saw the movies, but I don't really think you know how it happened. Not just because you don't know about the whimsical stuff like the flubberworms and them dying by too much lettuce. Books just hit different. I have a friend who just read Twilight for the first time in her life, and she, of course, devoured it in 24 hours, and then she had to take the next day off work so she could watch all 5 of the Twilight movies. I said, listen, I understand that. I get it. You're going to be chasing that high for the rest of your life. You get to read a book for the first time once. And that's a feeling that cannot be replicated. Like, I'm just so grateful to love books. Hashtag thanks mom. Because if you haven't read these books, if you only watch the movies, you literally don't know the interworkings of the Hogwarts castle. I think the whole castle operating on slave labor is important context, but like, hey, the movies don't. Anyway, Hagrid's also upset because he has to walk past the Dementors every time he goes up to the castle, and he has a sort of like PTSD episode every single time he sees them. So he even thinks about just releasing Buckbeak into the wild, but he's afraid that they'll send him back to Azkaban. So he's like now in a position where he feels like he has to choose his own safety over the care of a creature, right? Like, if you know Hagrid, you know that this is plaguing him. Like, he's dealing with PTSD and he's being targeted by a student and a lobbyist. Hermione engages Hagrid in conversation about Azkaban. She says, was it awful in there? And he says, yes, it's just replays of the worst day of your life over and over again. He says he saw the day he got expelled from Hogwarts, the day his dad died, the day he had to let Norbert go. But you were innocent. And Hagrid's like, do you think they care about that? As long as they have a couple hundred humans stuck in there with them so they can leech all the happiness out of them, they don't care who's innocent or what. And that's interesting because it means there's a couple hundred wizards in Azkaban. But like, there are 5 Gryffindor boys in Harry's class, which means there are probably 5 Gryffindor girls. So there's maybe 10 new Gryffindors, and there's only 4 houses. So that means only 40 new students, which means in the school at any given time, there's maybe 300 kids. So to hear that there's 300 kids in a generation, but a couple hundred wizards in Azkaban, it's not like they have like crazy long lifespans. Like, they have longevity. They're not susceptible to the same sort of deaths that humans are because they have different cures for certain ailments. But like, the numbers on the wizarding population simply are just not making any sort of sense. So Harry, Ron, and Hermione head back up to the castle, and they plan to devote themselves to finding precedent for hippogriffs getting off. It's not long before it's Christmas. They wake up and get their presents. Ron and Harry get their usual sweaters from Mrs. Weasley. Harry's has a Gryffindor lion knitted on the front this year. Ron's is maroon again. Then Harry rips open a parcel at the end of his bed to reveal a gleaming, gorgeous broomstick. It's the firebolt. Someone has sent him the firebolt. Ron is like, who sent it to you? And there's no note. Ron's like, who would spend that much money on you? I bet it was Dumbledore. And Harry's like, no, Dumbledore gave me my father's cloak because he'd been holding on to it. Dumbledore wouldn't just spend this much money on me. This is an international standard broom. Ron's like, maybe it was Lupin. Maybe he went to get it for you when he was away. And Harry's like, what do you mean he was away? I thought he was just ill. And Ron's like, well, he wasn't in the hospital wing because I was there cleaning bedpans. So Hermione comes downstairs in her dressing gown and with Crookshanks in her arms, and she's not that excited to see the surprise firebolt from an anonymous sender. She's like, well, you guys, this is supposed to be a pretty good broom, right? And Ron and Harry are like, right. And before they can have too much of a conversation about it, Crookshanks again attacks Scabbers, and the pocket sneakoscope starts whirling and like gleaming on the floor. Harry observes Scabbers for the first time in a bit and sees that Scabbers has lost a lot of weight. And Harry's like, is Scabbers okay? And Ron's like, no, it's just stress from the stupid cat. Harry's like, listen, despite the fact that Ron complains about Scabbers a lot, being boring and doing nothing, he thinks that Ron would be pretty upset if Scabbers just died. But Harry believes that Scabber is dying. All that day, Hermione, Ron, and Harry are kind of split on the broomstick thing. Hermione's lack of excitement around the firebolt positions her against the boys, and of course there's the Crookshanks Scabbers debate, and so Hermione apparently spends most of the day in the corner of the common room looking darkly at the broom as if it had been criticizing her cat. What a line, JK. That night is Christmas dinner, and the table is set for 12 because there's only 12 people left in the whole castle, so Dumbledore has the idea that everyone will sit together. Dumbledore is opening crackers, and one of the crackers that Snape opens has a hat in it with a vulture on top, no doubt evoking memories of the Boggart at the beginning of the semester. Dumbledore immediately grabs the hat and switches it out for his wizard hat, and so like has the cracker hat on his head. Like Dumbledore is just always game. Then Sybil Trelawney steps into the dining room. Dumbledore stands up and says, "Sybil, what a surprise." Sybil's like, "Oh my gosh, I thought I'd come join you, but never mind. It's very unlucky to seat 13 at a table because the first person to stand will undoubtedly die." Professor McGonagall's like, "We'll risk it, Sybil." And so when the table is sat for 13, right, Harry and Ron both stand up, and Sybil says, "Who stood up first?" But something that we know, having finished the book, is that if Ron had scabbers in his pocket, there were already 13 people at the table, and Dumbledore was the first to stand up. At that Christmas dinner, Dumbledore reveals that Lupin is ill again, and McGonagall's like, "Surely you already knew that, right, Sybil?" And Sybil's like, "One does not parade the fact that I am all-knowing. In fact, I frequently act as though I don't know things that I do." And Professor McGonagall's like, "Well, that explains a lot." And Trelawney's like, "Well, in fact, I've seen that Lupin won't be with us for very long." Dinner ends, and Hermione asks for a quick word with McGonagall. The boys are sitting in the common room when Hermione and McGonagall come back from dinner together. Hermione walks immediately into the common room, sits in a chair, and sort of hides behind a book. McGonagall asks Harry where he got that broom, and since it's from an anonymous sender, McGonagall says, "I'm sorry, I have to take it. Not to confiscate it or anything, but we have to check it for jinxes, because we think that maybe this broom was sent by Sirius Black." McGonagall takes the broom, and the boys look at Hermione and they're like, "Are you kidding?" No, McGonagall obviously agrees with me. This was the smart thing to do. But the boys are pretty pissed that she kind of went behind their back to get this done, and obviously now Harry doesn't have a broom again, and he doesn't know when he's going to get it back. Harry says he knows that Hermione has meant well, but that does not stop him from being angry at her. When the rest of the students get back from break, Oliver immediately seeks out Harry. He's like, "Harry, so your Dementor problem." And Harry's like, no, you don't even have to worry about it. I'm talking with Professor Lupin. We're getting it handled. I got it on lock. And Wood's like, "Great. I would hate to have to find a new seeker." Wood was about to kick him off the team. Wood says, "Well, did you pick a new broomstick?" And Harry says, "No, actually, but I got sent a firebolt." And they're like, "What? A real firebolt? Are you kidding me?" And he's like, "Yeah, but McGonagall took it. They're going to strip it down and check it for jinxes." And Wood's like, "They're going to what?" Harry says, "Apparently Sirius Black is supposed to be after me. They think maybe he sent it." They continue going about their classes. The second semester has started. In their Care of Magical Creatures class, Hagrid has provided this bonfire full of salamanders for the salamanders' enjoyment. They spend an unusually good lesson collecting dry wood and leaves to keep the fires blazing. So the salamanders like the fire, and they're all different colors. It's a very magical, wonderful Care of Magical Creatures time. Then they go to divination. They've started palmistry, and Professor Trelawney wastes no time telling Harry that he has the shortest lifeline she's ever seen. Harry and Ron aren't really speaking to Hermione. Hermione overhears them wondering about Professor Lupin and his illness and where he could be, and she sort of tuts behind them, and she's like, "It's obvious, isn't it?" And Ron's like, "If you don't want to tell us, just don't." And she says, "Fine." She doesn't know. She's just trying to get us to talk to her again. Harry and Lupin start their lessons, anti-Dementor lessons, their Patronus lessons. Lupin is teaching Harry about a Patronus, which is ultimately a magical shield of light and joy and happiness that the Dementors can't feed off of. It acts as a protective wall between the caster and the Dementors, and a full Patronus will chase down Dementors and ultimately clear them of the space. It's probably what the students saw Dumbledore execute on the Quidditch pitch. It's a guardian. Every wizard has a Patronus that's unique to them, to their soul. Lupin says, "This is really, really advanced magic, and most adult, full-grown wizards cannot conjure a Patronus. So it's a really big deal that you're trying it, and it's probably going to take a lot of energy out of you." Lupin has tracked down a boggart so that they can practice. They practice a few times, and there's a few wisps of the Patronus coming out of Harry's wand, but ultimately he passes out every time. And when he passes out, he hears more and more of that last night when his parents were alive. Around the second time that he's trying to conjure a Patronus, he actually hears his father's voice for the first time, telling Lily and Harry to make a run for it, that he'll take on Voldemort on his own. When he tells Lupin this, he says, "You heard James?" Lupin discloses that him and James were close friends at Hogwarts. Harry is disappointed in himself in that first lesson for not conjuring this extremely advanced magic right away. The only only way that a Patronus will work is if you're focusing on your most happy memories. It occurs to Harry that once he's able to conjure a full Patronus, it's possible that he won't hear his parents' voices again. And so he feels less incentivized to be successful. And that makes him feel really, really guilty because, oh my God, like, where's my head at? I'm supposed to be a friend for my Quidditch team. I'm letting my desire to hear my parents' voice get in the way of my desire to catch the snitch. Poor Harry. In the movie, they have Harry conquer this ultimately on like his second try. And I think that that does a huge disservice to the point of the Patronus. It's supposed to be really, really hard. And in the book, it takes Harry many, many attempts, months of trying without success before he's able to conjure just a small Patronus, not even in the face of a legitimate Dementor. And like, that's the point. You have to try and fail a few times or a bunch of times until you get it right, until you learn. So I feel like the movie just kind of like steals a lot of the depth from the characters in the story. After that first lesson, Harry's munching on some Honeydukes chocolate, and Harry says, well, if you knew my dad, you must have known Sirius Black as well. Lupin's like, what gives you that idea? If that's not how you respond about a romantic ex, I don't know. Yeah, I knew him, or I thought I did. Between Dementor lessons and Quidditch practices, Harry has just one night a week to get all of his homework done, and he says the only person that seems to be more stressed about homework than Harry is Hermione, who without fail spends every evening in the common room surrounded by a stack of books. Ron is like, how is she doing it? Wood and Harry have taken turns pestering McGonagall about the firebolt. Wood comes up to Harry one day and is like, hey, I've just seen McGonagall about the firebolt, and she got a bit shirty with me. Seemed to think I cared more about winning the Quidditch Cup than your safety, which obviously I don't. But anyway, maybe you should think about ordering a new broomstick. January fades to February, and Harry is now asking McGonagall after every single Transfiguration lesson if his broomstick is ready. And she's like, no, you can't have it back yet, because all the professors are trying to find the jinx within it. They're not really planning on giving it back to him until they've found the dark magic within it, but they can't find any dark magic within it, so that's why it's taking so long. Several sessions into his lessons with Lupin, he's able to produce an indistinct silvery shadow every time the Boggart Dementor approaches him, but the Patronus is too feeble to drive the Dementor away. He feels really angry with himself and pretty guilty about his secret desire to hear his dead parents' voices, so Harry's becoming discouraged, but Lupin is like, I have complete faith in you. After one of these lessons, Lupin offers Harry a butterbeer, and Harry's like, I love that stuff, but he's not supposed to ever have tried it. So he's like, Ron and Hermione just brought some back for me one time. I don't know. And Lupin's like, okay. And this is when Lupin tells Harry about the Dementor's kiss, which apparently Sirius Black is now destined for. They announced it in the Daily Prophet just this morning. A Dementor's kiss is when a Dementor has been cleared to lower its hood and suck the soul out of its captive. What they do is they clamp their jaws upon the mouth of the victim, leaving the victim alive, right? Your brain and body can work without a soul. Your soul will be gone. Lost forever. It's pretty much the worst fate that anyone can be victim to. Harry says, Sirius Black deserves it, I don't care. And Lupin says, do you really think anyone deserves that? And Harry says, yeah, I do. Then, much to everyone's excitement and surprise, McGonagall finds Harry. She's here to return his firebolt, which looks just as beautiful and magnificent as it did on Christmas morning. And she's like, Potter, do try and win, won't you? Because Gryffindor hasn't won the Quidditch Cup since Charlie Weasley was the Seeker, and that was like years and years ago. Now that they have the broom back, they're like, we should make up with Hermione. You know, she was only trying to help. They're headed back to the common room when they run into Neville. Sir Cadogan won't let him in. I wrote down the passwords, I swear. Come clap this loon in irons. He is trying to force entry to the chambers within. Harry lets Neville in, and he goes to talk to Hermione, and they're having their first civil conversation in about a month. And Harry's like, why don't you just drop a few subjects? Like, maybe this is a lot. And she's like, what? Scandalized. I couldn't do that. And just when it looks like the trio may reunite, Ron comes downstairs from his bedroom screaming about how there's blood on his sheets and Scabbers is gone and there are 3 long ginger hairs in his bed. It looks like the end of Ron and Hermione's friendship. Ron is saying, your cat ate my pet. Hermione's saying, your pet is just somewhere else. You don't even know if he's dead. You've just found some blood. And Harry says personally he's pretty sure that Crookshanks had eaten Scabbers, almost without a doubt. First the firebolt and now Scabbers. Like, why is everything my fault? Just leave me alone. Like, I've got so much homework to do. I don't have time for this. And she like storms off. George and Fred try to comfort Ron about his, rat that is presumed dead. And they're like, Ron, you said all he did was eat and sleep. You didn't even like him. Like, he bit Goyle for us once. Remember, Harry? They're like, why don't you just go down to Hogsmeade and buy a new rat? Like, what's the big deal? And it's like, I do get this. Like, what do you mean, what is the big deal? This is his pet. This is his friend. Like, no one would be responding this way if it was an owl. I think this is meant to diminish the impact of what is coming. Harry goes to his first practice with the firebolt. Ravenclaw is who they're playing next, and the Ravenclaw Seeker is Cho Chang. It's the first girl Seeker he's ever played against. Before they can start playing, Madam Hooch, who's like overseeing all their training sessions, is like looking at the firebolt. Everyone's really marveling at it. Ron wants to take a turn afterwards. It's a great practice. The firebolt is super fast, and everyone has like reinvigorated hope for the cup. Once they get to the castle, the whole team is like, put it here, Harry. Put it in the middle of the table. And everyone in the whole school is like, oh my god, is that a real firebolt? Slytherin looks pretty perturbed because like that's a very, very nice broom. And Harry's job as the Seeker is to be fast. So like if his broom is the fastest broom, he's got good chances. Malfoy says, shame it doesn't come with a parachute, just in case you come too close to a Dementor. Pity you can't attach an extra arm to yours, Malfoy, to help you catch the snitch. Ooh! On the day of the match, Harry notices that Cho Chang, the only girl on the Ravenclaw Quidditch team, is actually extremely pretty. And she was undoubtedly a good flyer. She kept cutting across Harry, and she's a very strategic flyer. He notices that she seems to be letting him lead the way to the snitch and then chasing him down and cutting him off course. So he decides that he's going to falsely lead her away. Obviously, his broom can go much faster than hers. If she wanted to tail him, she'd have to take the consequences. Harry eventually spots the snitch, and as he's chasing it down, he sees Dementors out of the peripheral of his eye, and he doesn't even look, and a Patronus shoots out of his wand, and he catches the snitch, and they win. Wood keeps yelling, "That's my boy! That's my boy!" And the team all swarms him on their brooms, and they're like jumping up and down, and they make their way to the ground. Ron's like, yes, everyone's like, well done, Harry. Gryffindor, this is a huge deal because now they're real contenders for the cup. Lupin says that was some Patronus. And Harry's like, yeah, it was easy. I wasn't even affected by the Dementors at all. And Lupin's like, well, that's because they weren't actually Dementors. Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, and Marcus Flint, the captain of the Slytherin Quidditch team, dressed as Dementors to throw Harry off his game. McGonagall is so pissed about this. She's like, this is extremely unsportsmanlike behavior. I personally feel like Slytherin should just be cut from the cup. Like, what the heck? The mood isn't too dampened though, because Gryffindor won anyway. It didn't work. They have a party in the common room. Fred and George leave for a few hours and miraculously come back with a bunch of Honeyduke sweets. Hermione isn't really partaking in the festivities. She's like, I'm really glad you won, Harry, but I have to read this by Monday. And it's like a copy of like Habits of British Muggles. Like the party is raging until like 1 a.m. McGonagall has to come into the common room and tell them all to go to bed. And they do, but it's not long before Ron is shouting in his bed. He's screaming that Sirius Black was just standing over him with a knife. And his curtain is in fact slashed. All run down into the common room and other Gryffindors start to wake up. Fred and George come out and are like, excellent, are we carrying on? And Percy's like, hey, we're all supposed to be going to sleep. Like, everybody back to bed. Ron's like, no, you guys, Sirius Black, Sirius Black. And everybody thinks that Ron was maybe having a nightmare, but then there's this proof of his actual curtain being slashed. Professor McGonagall comes back in and starts yelling at them all. She's like, I don't want to have to tell you twice. Get back upstairs. Professor, Sirius Black was just standing over me. She goes and she asks Sir Cadogan if he just let a gentleman in through the door. And Sir Cadogan says, yes, I did. He had the whole week's worth of passwords. McGonagall's like, what fool saw fit to write down the passwords and leave them laying about the castle? And Neville is like, oh my god, me. She bars Neville from going to Hogsmeade for the rest of the year for his like carelessness and thoughtlessness. Like, poor Neville, he could not catch a break. This is a hard year for Neville. He's wearing slippers. This leads security measures to be increased in the castle. Sir Cadogan has been dismissed from his post and the fat lady has been brought back in. She's agreed to continue to secure the door, but only if there's extra reinforcements. And so there's these like grumpy trolls that also stand outside the Gryffindor common room. Harry's a little nervous because he's like, okay, well, I do have a map of the school that shows me these tunnels that it seems like no one else knows about. Do we think that Sirius Black is coming in through there? All the kids are like, we know he's not coming through Honeydukes because the Honeydukes owners would hear him. And it's like, well, that's a crazy wild thing to say because this man broke out of Azkaban. It's just not good logic. They don't want to give up the map. They're rationalizing. Because Ron was almost attacked by Sirius Black in the dead of night, he's receiving more attention than Harry for the first time in his life. He finds himself telling and retelling the tale of waking up with the murderer standing over him. And he's enjoying it. He likes attention. He's never gotten it before. So a lot of people are speculating about why Black didn't just kill Ron at that moment when clearly he just simply had the wrong bed. Their rationale is that, well, if he'd killed Ron, he probably would have had to kill all the other students in the room, and then he would have been met by a whole host of teachers when he was trying to exit through the portrait hole. So he probably just fled instead. Neville receives a howler from his grandmother about what a shame he is. He's received attention and he's obviously been barred from going to Hogsmeade. The assumption is that Harry has basically not been murdered because of a fluke, because of Black's mistake. Harry and Ron are summoned by Hagrid. Hagrid says he's going to come pick them up from the castle. Don't walk on your own. Ron's like, he probably wants to hear about Saturday night. And Hagrid's like, no, I'm actually here to talk to you about Buckbeak. His trial is on Friday. Harry and Ron feel like an immense guilt because they haven't been working on Buckbeak's trial at all. They got really caught up in the firebolt and the Quidditch and all the other happenings at Hogwarts, so they haven't helped. But Hermione has been a real help, and he has a lot of dates and cases that he's going to use, and he reckons that Buckbeak the Hippogriff stands a pretty good chance now. Hagrid then kind of lectures the boys, says that they clearly haven't been very nice to Hermione. She's been down here at the hut a lot since Christmas, ever since her cat ate Scabbers. Ron is like, what the heck? If she would just get rid of her cat. Hagrid says her cat acted like all cats do, and I figured you guys would have valued your friendship more than broomsticks and rats, but you know, whatever. So they're thoroughly shamed by Hagrid. Doesn't help matters when later they're talking with Hermione and she tells Harry that if he goes to Hogsmeade again, she's going to tell on him. Fine, I won't go. They lie to Hermione and Ron and Harry devise a plan where at this next Hogsmeade trip, Harry's going to wear his invisibility cloak. But before he can get through the secret passageway, Neville is like, oh my God, Harry, I forgot that you're not allowed to go to Hogsmeade either. I'll just hang out with you. And Harry's like, oh, I'm actually headed to the library to finish this essay. And Neville's like, oh, great, I'll come with you. I haven't finished it either. Oh, actually, I just remembered I finished it. I'm not going there anymore. And Neville's like, great, you can help me. There's all this rigmarole to ditch Neville, and then he finally makes his way through the portrait hole. He invisibly finds his way to Ron. Him and Ron walk through Hogsmeade. They go to Zonko's, the joke shop, for the first time. Ron inquires about the price of sending an owl to Bill in Egypt so that Harry can look around the owlry, which apparently has more than 300 owls in it, which I think would be really cool to see. As Harry and Ron are checking out the Shrieking Shack, to anyone, it looks like Ron is just wandering around by himself because Harry's under the cloak. They hear Malfoy discussing Buckbeak's trial. They're mimicking Hagrid and being really awful. Harry, from under his cloak, scoops up a handful of mud and throws it at Malfoy. Malfoy gets hit by the mud and looks around. It's pretty haunted up here, isn't it? Says Ron, with the air of someone commenting on the weather. More mud gets thrown at Crabbe, Goyle, and Malfoy, and I think it's interesting, right? Because obviously in the movie it's snow, but mud is a very different thing. I think the reason it's mud is meant to parallel the term, mud slinging, which is something that Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, and a lot of the Slytherins are often doing, versus Harry, who's legitimately throwing mud here. While they're caught up in this altercation, the cloak slips off of Harry and his head pops out from under it, and all of a sudden there's just his head floating in the air. And so Crabbe, Goyle, and Malfoy all go running for the castle, and Harry's like, oh my God, because no one else would believe this story if Harry can get back to the castle in time, except Dumbledore. Dumbledore would know exactly what happened. And so Harry is sprinting back to the castle. He's running under the tunnel, and he's got a sharp pain in his side. He's laboring, he's trying to get there. And he makes his way into Hogwarts. His hands are still covered in mud. He has to ditch the cloak inside the tunnel behind the witch's hump. And as soon as he arrives, he runs into none other than Snape, who's just been told a story about Harry by Malfoy. Snape's like, Malfoy just saw your head floating in the air outside of Shrieking Shack. Harry's like, maybe he should go to Madame Pomfrey if he's having these sorts of hallucinations. They're gonna have to find a way to prove it, right? Prove prove that I was there. They don't know about the secret tunnel. They don't know about the invisibility cloak. He tells Harry to turn out his pockets, and in his pockets are all the Zonko's contraband that he has just picked up. And he's like, oh, Ron gave those to me last time he went to Hogsmeade. And Snape's like, and you've been carrying them around ever since. How touching. And Snape pretty much knows exactly what is going on. He's like, okay, so the entirety of the Ministry of Magic is working to keep you safe, but Harry Potter is law upon himself. Your father, too, was exceedingly arrogant. A small amount of talent on the Quidditch field made him think he, too, was above the law, strutting about the castle. And, like, people feel comfortable saying pretty horrible things to Harry about his dead parents all the time. When someone's speaking ill of Harry's parents is really when the rage starts to boil inside of him, because he didn't get to know whether or not the things these people are saying are true. Harry, in a fit of rage, tells Snape that he knows why he hated his dad, because his dad, James Potter, saved Snape's life when they were at school. And Snape says, did our headmaster tell you why he had to save my life? It's because your father and his friends played a trick on me that would have resulted in my death and their expulsion. If your father hadn't gotten cold feet at the last moment and saved my life, everything would look a little different. He also finds in Harry's pocket the Marauders map, which ultimately just looks like an old bit of parchment. He tries to get the map to open itself, but it just continues to insult Snape. Snape says, let's bring in the dark arts master. And he throws some flue powder into the fire and shouts like, Lupin! And Lupin like comes to the flames and is like, you rang? Like, he's like, look at this. How did Harry get his hands on this? And an odd expression appears on Lupin's face. And he's like, I don't know, Harry, where'd you get this? And Snape is like, you don't think it's more likely he got it directly from the manufacturers? Lupin's like, you mean to say that Harry knows Mr. Wormtail or one of these people? Harry, do you know these men? And that's funny because Wormtail is the only Mordor that Harry's acquainted with. And at that moment, Ron also comes running into Snape's office, completely out of breath. And he's like, I gave Harry that stuff. I gave it to him. And Lupin's like, well, that clears it up. So I'll take Harry and Ron. And, Snape, you don't have to worry about this. I'll handle this. And then Lupin kind of rounds on Harry and is like, I happen to know that this was confiscated by Mr. Filch many years ago. And I don't know how you got your hands on it. But I am disappointed to know that you didn't immediately turn it in with Sirius Black running around the castle. You have information here, and Sirius Black could have gotten his hands on it. And then Harry's like, how do you know what the map does? Do you know the Mordors? Lupin's like, we've met. And then Lupin says, a poor way to repay your parents, their sacrifice, being so cavalier with your own life. And it really chafes me whenever anyone says something like this to Harry, because one, I don't think Harry is being cavalier with his parents' sacrifice, and two, I don't think you owe your parents anything. What? On his way back to the common room, he passes the one-eyed witch with the hump, and he remembers that his invisibility cloak is still down there, but it doesn't feel like safe and it's too risky to retrieve it. They run into Hermione, and she seems very somber, and Harry initially worries that she reported him to McGonagall. She's somber because she's just received a letter from Hagrid that Buckbeak lost his case and his execution has been scheduled. Ron says, oh my god, I'm so sorry, Hermione. You don't have to do all the work this time. I'll help you. Hermione flings her arms around Ron and sobs like into his shoulder, and though Ron looks quite uncomfortable, it's a touching moment. She says she's really sorry about Scabbers. Hagrid says he kept dropping his notes and forgetting all the dates and that it's his fault that Buckbeak lost. And Ron says, there's still an appeal. Don't give up. And they hear Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle making fun of Hagrid. And as they're all about to round on Malfoy, Hermione smacks Malfoy in the face. And then she points her wand at him and says, don't you dare call Hagrid pathetic, you little piece of shit. Paraphrasing. Hermione! Ron is like impressed and stunned. And Ron's like, we have to go to class. We're doing charms. Like, let's go. But then on the way to charms, Hermione just never gets there. She just disappears and doesn't show up. And then when they get back to the common room, they find Hermione asleep with her books. And Ron's like, Hermione, you didn't go to charms. How? And she's like, oh my god, I forgot to go to charms. What the heck? Like, I'm so overwhelmed. Like, and Ron's like, how can you have forgotten to go to charms? We were on our way to charms. She missed cheering charms, and so everyone feels a little bit better, but Hermione didn't get to participate or learn this thing, and she's pretty sure it's going to be on the exam, so she feels really bad about that. Then they all head to Divination. Trelawney has changed the curriculum schedule because the fates have informed her that something different will be on the exam, and Hermione's like, okay, well, who sets the exam. She does. What do you mean the fates have informed? She writes the exam. And this is when Trelawney and Hermione have their final showdown, because Trelawney says it's never been clearer than it is today that an enormous black dog is stalking Harry. But there is an enormous black dog stalking Harry. Hermione fights back, says it's not okay what she's doing about the Grim and the death omens with Harry. Trelawney says she's never met a student whose mind was so mundane. The way that would have wrecked me as a 13-year-old, that would have taken me out. Anyway, Hermione's like, fine, okay, I give up. I'm leaving. Whatever. The whole class is like, wow, like mad respect to Hermione today. Hermione, like, she kicks open the door. She goes down the ladder and she's like, I quit. Divination sucks. Parvati and Lavender are like, oh my gosh, you saw one of us leaving around Easter. It was Hermione. It happened. Oh my God. The next day, they're all at the library. Hermione is always the first to arrive at the library because she has so much work to do. And Ron is now like really entrenched in the Hippogriff appeals, working to find precedent to get Buckbeak released. The big Quidditch Cup tournament between Gryffindor and Slytherin is coming up, and Slytherin is up by 200 points. So even if Gryffindor wins this game, but they don't win it by 200 points, Slytherin would still win the Quidditch Cup. So Oliver continues to reiterate to Harry that he can only catch the snitch if they're up by 50 points. He can only catch the snitch if they're up by 50 points. Tensions are really, really high, and Wood informs the rest of the Gryffindors to always accompany Harry because he believes that the Slytherins are going to play dirty and they're going to try to take Harry out. So Harry gets to every class late because he's surrounded by chattering people. They're trying to keep him safe. And he often does like see Crabbe and Goyle round the corner. Like they have been sicked on Harry to try to take him out, but the rest of Gryffindor protects him. One night, Harry gets up in the night and he's looking out the window and he sees Crookshanks walking across the lawn. And Crookshanks is interacting with an enormous black dog. And Harry's like, oh, well, if Crookshanks can see the dog, then it's probably not a death omen. It's probably actually a dog. The day of the match, tensions are even higher. They say that 3/4 of the school has showed up for Gryffindor, but 200 people have shown up for Slytherin. I don't know how those numbers make sense unless maybe like Slytherin families come out for the games. Like there definitely aren't 200 Slytherin students, but Lee Jordan is announcing the game and he is, reprimanded by McGonagall the whole time because he's not being impartial. Before the game starts, Cho tells Harry good luck. The game goes on and the Slytherins are playing really, really dirty, but it's not making a difference. Gryffindor is up by 10 points, up by 20 points. Harry just has to wait, make sure that Malfoy can't see the snitch until he's ready to catch it. Eventually, he does lead Malfoy astray. He finds his way to the snitch, his hand closes around it, and Gryffindor has won the Quidditch Cup for the first time in so many years. It's a huge excitement. It's a big celebration. They did it. Harry did it. Gryffindor did it. It's amazing. Wood is sobbing unrestrainedly into Harry's shoulder. Professor McGonagall is crying even harder. And Harry says if only there had been a Dementor around, it wouldn't have stood a chance. We've brought ourselves to the end of the year. The weather is warmed up and exams are looming. It's very, very hard to study because the weather's so nice outside. They have to force their brains to retain information that they're going to be tested on. Percy has always been very stressed about homework, but he's even more stressed now because he's trying to get a job with the Ministry of Magic. He even, had aspirations to be minister himself one day. Ron glimpses Hermione's schedule and notices that she has an exam at 9 o'clock in arithmancy, 9 o'clock in transfiguration. She has overlapping exams. Harry says, is there any point asking how you're going to sit for 2 exams at once? And she says no. The kids are unable to really share in the good weather mood though, because as the days tick forward, so does Buckbeak's execution date. Buckbeak is set to be executed on the day they finish their exams. Ron has spent ages reading up on stuff for Buckbeak and he feels pretty prepared to make his case. They take their transfiguration exam and it's very, very hard. McGonagall's classes are always really hard. Hagrid's exam is they just have to look after a flubberworm. If the flubberworm is still alive at the end of the exam, they pass. Harry has a really hard time in potions. He can't get his confusing concoction to thicken and he believes that he sees Snape fail him. And for Defense Against the Dark Arts, Lupin has set up an obstacle course with all of the dark arts creatures that they have studied this year. And if you can make it to the end of the obstacle course, you'll get X grade. And we see for the first time what Hermione's biggest fear is. The boggart at the end of the obstacle course shows Hermione Professor McGonagall telling her she's failed everything. So Hermione's biggest fear is failure. The boys are headed for their last exam, Divination, when they see the Minister of Magic magic, and the executioner, Macnair, headed toward the castle. And Ron is like, what the heck? When they run into Cornelius Fudge, Ron is like, this isn't justice. You brought an executioner. You clearly think that this is going to fall one way. And Hermione's like, you can't talk to him that way, Ron. He's your dad's boss. Ron and Harry head up to the Divination Tower to take their divination exam. The exam is looking into a crystal ball and telling Trelawney what you see, and if she thinks it's plausible, you seem to get good points. Ron is starting to become disillusioned to the whole thing. He's like, I don't know, that's pretty convenient. When Harry finally goes in for his exam, he says he sees a hippogriff in the crystal ball, and Trelawney's like, oh, well, there is a trial today. Does the hippogriff still have its head? And Harry's like, yep, in fact, it's flying away. And she's like, oh, well, maybe you don't have the gift then, because she assumes that the hippogriff will die. But like I said, Harry is correct in his prophecy, just like Hermione was correct about Sirius, just like Hermione was correct about Tom Riddle winning the Medal of Valor for opening the Chamber of Secrets. They do seem to have some prophetic ability, or the things they say do seem to come to fruition. As Harry is leaving his exam, Professor Trelawney seems to have some sort of seizure or fit, and she starts speaking in a new voice, and she says, it will happen tonight. And Harry's like, what? She's gone rigid in her chair. Harry's like, Professor Trelawney, are you okay? She doesn't seem to see or hear him. Her eyes have started to roll in her head, and she makes a prophecy. She says, his servant has been chained these 12 years. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will break free and return to its master. When she finishes the prophecy, she kind of coughs. It's like, ooh, sorry, what were you saying? I think I fell asleep. It's like, this is his exam. And Harry's like, you just made a prediction about the Dark Lord being reunited with his faithful servant, who Harry assumes to be Sirius Black. And Trelawney says, oh, my dear boy, that's not something to joke about. I would never make a prediction that outlandish. And so Harry leaves the divination room, and he's like, did I just hear Trelawney make a legitimate prediction? And what does that mean for me, right? He doesn't become more afraid by any means to know that the Dark Lord's servant will imminently be joining him tonight after midnight. Harry leaves his divination exam to find that Buckbeak lost his appeal, and so they're going to go down to Hagrid's to be there with him when it happens, which I think is very brave. They can't just walk down to Hagrid's hut. They're not allowed to leave the castle. And so Hermione says, where'd you leave your cloak again? I'll go get it. And the boys are always surprised at which rules Hermione's willing to break, but it seems so clear, right, that Hermione is always just evaluating their safety. And she also has a strong sense of justice. So the three of them get under the cloak, and they walk very close together down to Hagrid's hut. They arrive, and they see Hagrid existing in a state of helplessness. He offers them some tea, and his hands are shaking, and silent tears are rolling down Hermione's face. She offers to take the jug from him. And when she takes the jug from him to set it on his table, who does she discover but Scabbers, hiding in Hagrid's hut. She's like, Ron, I don't believe it. This is Scabbers. And Ron's like, oh my God, he's right here. And as they discover him, they hear a group of men walking down toward the hut. And Buckbeak seems to know something is happening. There's tension in the air. The three kids leave Hagrid's hut underneath the cloak, and Ron is trying to put Scabbers in his pocket where he usually sits, up against his body, nestled close to him. Ugh, it's so gross. They had tried to make it back up to the castle before the execution took place. They can hear men's voices behind them, and they hear the unmistakable swing of an axe. They are horrified. They believe that Buckbeak's life has just ended. Before they can process this, Scabbers is clearly freaking out. He won't stay put. And because the three of them are underneath this cloak, they're like, Ron, you have to stay here. Eventually, Scabbers jumps out of Ron's pocket, and Ron goes tearing out from under the cloak to chase Scabbers. Running under the cloak, run after him, because Ron is not supposed to be out on the grounds either. They're trying to get Ron back under the cloak when all of a sudden they turn around and they see Crookshanks and an enormous black dog. It runs at them and lunges over them. The dog grabs Ron and starts dragging him toward the Whomping Willow. Harry and Hermione are running after him while Ron is like, oh my God, Ron is being dragged into the tunnel under the violent tree by an enormous dog. And then Harry, he gets hit hard across the face by the Whomping Willow. That's a branch that swings across his face. That would hurt so bad. And they can see Ron fighting at the base of the tree, and they're trying to save their friend. Ron, in an effort not to be dragged into the tunnel underneath the tree, kicks his leg out and tries to wrap his foot, to try to get purchased, like hold so the dog can't drag him into the tunnel, and that's what breaks his leg. So Ron kind of broke his own leg. Hermione's like, Harry, we have to go get help. Harry's like, no, what? The dog could be doing anything to him right now. There's no time. We have to go now. And so they're trying to get through the branches of the Whomping Willow that's actively trying to keep them from going into the tunnel. And Hermione says, help, oh, please help, which is, again, the second book wherein someone has to ask for help and then it is awarded to them. Crookshanks comes out from under a bush and taps a knot on the tree, and all of the branches stop moving. The kids are able to go climb into the tunnel. But the thing about the tunnel, they knew this tunnel existed because it's marked on the Marauders map. Fred and George believe no one could ever get in there, and they don't know where it leads to because it leads to an edge that isn't mapped, but it looked like it goes up into Hogsmead. So the two kids, these two 13-year-olds, enter this dark, dank tunnel. They have to run like hunched over, like at an angle because it's so small, because it's not meant for walking. It's meant for crawling. It's miles to Hogsmead, right? Like the movie does a disservice as it relates to the distance being covered by these kids. Like they are running hunched over like this under a tunnel to go face some random animal that has just attacked and stolen their friend. Like this is bravery. Finally, they arrive at the end of the tunnel and they come up into a house where all the paint is peeling off the walls and every single piece of furniture is broken. And Hermione is like, I think we're in the Shrieking Shack. In the Shrieking Shack, they find on an enormous and magnificent 4-poster bed Ron, Scabbers, and Crookshanks. Ron is like, it's not a dog, he's an animagus. And they look over in the corner, and who is standing there but Sirius Black, escaped convict. That is so scary. And when this whole thing happens, when you don't know what's going on, this is the most jarring, disorienting scene like in the world. Like this is what I'm talking about. This is brave. Like she took this to a publisher and she said, yeah, get through it. But when you read it on the second thing, it all makes a ton of sense. It's really cool writing. And really, we're just at the top of the twist, right? Sirius says it was brave of you to come down here without a teacher. Your father would have done the same for me. And a boiling hate erupts inside of Harry's chest because he's like, don't talk about my dad. But before he can speak, Ron is like, if you want to kill Harry, you're going to have to kill all of us. And something flickers in Black's eyes and he's like, lie down. He seems to care for Ron in this moment. He says there will be only one murder here tonight. And Harry like screams at him and he's like, you killed my parents. And Black is being super vague. He's like, I don't deny it. Because he feels like he did kill Harry's parents. He does feel guilty. He feels like it is his fault. It's sounding to Harry like he's confessing to betraying his parents and selling them out to Lord Voldemort. And Harry and Black engage in this altercation. Harry attacks Black and like has his hands around his throat and like the two of them are like wrestling basically. But Black hasn't killed or hurt any of these children yet, despite the fact that he's been alone with them. So that should clue us in as the reader. Harry gets the better of Black and has his wand pointed at him, is thinking about killing him. Harry, this 13-year-old, is maybe going to kill Sirius Black. That's the depth of the rage. And I think that really gets lost in the movies too, before he can really hurt Sirius Black. Crookshanks jumps off the bed and jumps onto Sirius Black's chest and curls up there. Sirius Black tries to push Crookshanks off very gently, but Crookshanks won't go. And so Harry's like, so what if he has to kill the cat, right? If Black wanted to save the cat, it just proved that he cared more for Crookshanks than he did for his parents. Hermione hears commotion on the floor below, and she yells, we're up here, please come up here. And all of a sudden, Lupin, he bursts into the room and he immediately disarms all the kids. And the kids are like, what? Like, we trusted you. Why are you taking our wands? It's Sirius Black. Lupin is like, I think there's something that's been misunderstood. Lupin and Black embrace like brothers. Hermione says, he's been helping Black get into the castle. He's a werewolf. He's going to try to kill you. And Lupin says, not at all up to your usual standards, Hermione. Only 1 out of 3. I am a werewolf, but I have not been helping Sirius Black into the castle, and I have no intention to hurt Harry. He asks Hermione how long she's known, and she's like, ages. So long, since Snape set the essay. Did you notice that I was always sick on a full moon, or that the boggart turned into the moon? And she says both. They threaten to tell the teachers, and Lupin's like, well, most of the professors already know. It was controversial of Dumbledore to appoint me, but they knew when I was hired. He separates all of the kids' wands, and he throws them back to them. Lupin seems to have come to an understanding about Sirius Black and doesn't seem to think he's the threat that he did just in their last conversation. Lupin tells them that he came running down from his office when he saw them coming through the tunnel at the Whomping Willow in the map, when he saw who they were traveling with. Harry's like, hey, you know how to work it? He's like, of course I know how to work it. I'm Moony. So Lupin is one of the Marauders. Lupin tells the kids that he saw on the map Sirius dragging Ron and Peter Pettigrew into the Whomping Willow. And the kids say, well, the map was wrong then. But the map is never wrong. Then he asks Ron if he could have a look at his rat. Sirius Black says, that's not a rat. He says, no, he's not. He's a wizard, an animagus. And they're like, we're going to kill him now. The kids are like, these guys are crazy. These guys are not right in the head. And when you're reading it, right, it does sound ludicrous. It sounds insane. What do you mean the rat is the bad guy? But it is revealed the fourth boy and the quad of the Mordors was Peter Pettigrew. And even though Sirius Black was, yes, definitely intended to be the Potter's secret keeper, at the last minute, Sirius Black convinced the Potters to switch to Pettigrew. It was a bluff. Black assumed that no one would ever believe that the weak and sniveling Pettigrew would be the secret keeper for the Potters. Little did they know that Peter Pettigrew himself had been a spy for Voldemort for over a year. Of course, Remus and Sirius both thought the other the spy, so neither of them was able to confide this plan in one another. When Sirius arrived at the scene, he would have been the only person who knew that Peter Pettigrew was the person that sold out the Potters. And so Peter Pettigrew, instead of facing the music, chopped off his own finger, faked his own death, and framed Sirius Black for the murder of his best friend. So if we look at this from Sirius Black's perspective, he has spent 12 years in prison. At 21 years old, his best friend was murdered, betrayed by his other best friend. And the only other person that he can confide in about it thinks that he was the betrayer. And then he had to sit in Azkaban for 12 years. And the reason that he broke out of Azkaban was because what did he see in the newspaper? But the clipping of Ron and his family winning the Daily Prophet Grand Galleon Prize. And who was in that picture? But Scabbers himself. Sirius identified Scabbers and realized that Peter Pettigrew was very close to Harry. He was at Hogwarts with Harry and would have access to him. And it was his love for Harry that forced him to formulate a plan of escape. I had to move my camera because it died, and we're toward the end, so this is just the angle we're going to have to finish it at so that I can keep it plugged in. But I'll get a longer cord. Lupin confides that when he was a very young boy, he was bit by a werewolf. That meant that he faced a lot of social outcast, ostracization, stigma. In fact, many parents would not have wanted him attending Hogwarts at all. But Dumbledore took it upon himself to make sure that Lupin could attend Hogwarts as a young child and do so safely. So the Whomping Willow was planted so that Lupin, during a full moon, would have a place to go and keep himself and other villagers and other students safe. He's meant to crawl under the Whomping Willow and spend his full moons in the Shrieking Shack. In fact, the reason that the villagers think the Shrieking Shack is haunted is because of the screams and shrieks and what would go on with Lupin on those full moons. It sounds like a really intense, horrible, pretty violent affliction that he is suffering. Lupin, for the first time in his life when he got to Hogwarts, made friends. He made friends with James Potter and Sirius Black. Peter Pettigrew was also a part of their group. He was very, very worried that his friends were going to notice that he was always sick on the full moon and eventually discard him when they found out that he was a werewolf. But what they did instead, when they did, of course, notice, was try to figure out a way that they could be with their best friend while he endured this horribleness. So it took them the better part of 3 years, but they all secretly become animagi, which is a wizard like McGonagall that can turn into an animal. Hermione says she doesn't believe this story. Hermione says, no, all animagi are registered with the Ministry of Magic. I looked it up when I did my essay on animagi. Harry says he barely even has time to marvel at the effort that Hermione is putting into her homework when the story continues to unfold. We learn that Sirius Black is Padfoot, Peter Pettigrew, Wormtail, Lupin, Moony, and James Potter prongs. Before we continue into the story, right, we have to talk about werewolfdom. Many people believe that Lupin's affliction of werewolfhood is meant to be a metaphor for HIV or queerness in general. Lupin is penetrated as a young child by a predator who means to bite him and finds pleasure spreading this disease, and then obviously faces stigma and isolation. Many people believe it's a reference to the AIDS panic, and with the AIDS panic came the colloquial understanding that it was like gay panic. AIDS was a gay disease that only afflicted gay men. And even though Lupin is obviously a sympathetic character who we're supposed to root for, and we're supposed to recognize that him being a werewolf doesn't define him and shouldn't mean that he can't hold employment, he's a hero in our story, certainly. He does eventually prove himself to be legitimately dangerous, and it's just a part of his condition. He does threaten the people around him. It's kind of another example of the love and light shellac that coats a much more dangerous and dark message. The message is ultimately that Lupin is the anomaly of his kind. The argument that's being made here is, yes, that Lupin should not be discriminated against, but the other side of the argument is that it's in Lupin's nature to bite and spread this disease, which it's painting people with HIV as predators, right? Like, so what Lupin would do, the reason he was hiding out in the Shrieking Shack in his werewolf form, he's compelled to bite and hurt other people, but he'd instead inflict those bites and scratches on himself, which is a personal choice, right? It's in line with the theme of the rest of the book, which is that you do get to decide who you get to be regardless of your circumstances. But she's also saying, notably, that werewolves or queer folks aren't safe around children. That's a not cool and pretty outdated idea at the time that she's writing this. Yes, on one side we see a kind, innocent, and gentle person suffer for the stigma around the condition that was inflicted upon him, and yet Lupin does endanger the lives of at least 3 of his students because he didn't take his potion, and he does not tell Dumbledore about the way Sirius may be getting into the castle. No one else knows that Sirius is an anime guy except for Lupin, and he doesn't tell him because he doesn't want to disappoint Dumbledore, who, stuck his neck out for him so many times throughout his life. This understanding of the metaphor being HIV or queerness amidst the context clues gave a lot of the fandom what we considered evidence in this book and the next of Remus and Sirius's love story. Obviously, though, that's not technically canonically accurate because of later events, but right now in the Shrieking Shack, it could be real. It did look like JK Rowling was writing Lupin as a queer man, and it looked like he had a deeper relationship with Sirius than brotherhood or best friendom. But anyway, back to the story. So the potion that Professor Snape has been making Lupin keeps him safe so he can just curl up in his office and go to sleep. But by the time the Wolfsbane potion was discovered, he was already a full-grown wizard. So the tunnel and the tree were meant to keep him safe when he was a student at Hogwarts, and his friends who couldn't keep him company in human form found a way to keep him company as animals. And that's how they came to write the Marauders map, by walking around the grounds and the castle at night in animal form. They're not formally registered as anime guy because they did it on their own. And that is very dangerous magic. It could have ended really, really poorly, but Lupin says they were caught up in their own cleverness and youth. And Lupin himself, though he recognized what was happening as a sort of betrayal to Dumbledore's trust or kindness, couldn't find it in himself to push away the people that were showing him such loyalty and love, which I understand. They tell us more of the story that Professor Snape was at school with these 4 boys, and at one point in time, Sirius, when he was angry with Professor Snape, told Snape how to get into the tunnel under the Whomping Willow because Snape was always in their business or whatever. He was snooping around. And so Sirius, probably thinking that Lupin would just scare him or underestimating the danger that Lupin posed to Snape, sent him into the tunnel. James was able to call it off. Otherwise, Snape probably would have been murdered by Lupin in his werewolf form. Just as Lupin is coming to the end of this story and the kids are maybe starting to believe that Scabbers is actually Peter Pettigrew, all of a sudden Snape pulls the invisibility cloak off of his head and is in the Shrieking Shack, which just like, let me just say how jarring and alarming that is to picture. That's so scary. Snape says, I found this at the base of the Whomping Willow, and he throws the cloak aside. He was like, you forgot to take your potion tonight, so I went to the office. I told the headmaster that it was you who was helping Black into the castle. 2 more for Azkaban tonight. Snape could not be more excited. He's run into his high school bullies, and he's found them caught red-handed on his turf, so to speak. Lupin calls him a fool and says a schoolboy grudge should not be the reason that an innocent man dies. Hermione tries to intervene by telling Snape what's going on, and he tells her to keep quiet, you stupid girl. And Harry tells Snape that he's pathetic. There's a lot of yelling going on. It's a very confusing scene. Snape says, like father, like son, I've just saved your ass. And at that moment, all 3 kids disarm Snape, and it leads him to fly backwards into a wall and sort of be buried under some rubble. Hermione's like, oh my god, we attacked a teacher. Sirius explains that when Fudge gave him his newspaper, he saw Scabbers and identified that his toe was missing, and Sirius has obviously always known that Peter Pettigrew faked his death, and in knowing that Harry was in danger at Hogwarts, he decided that he was going to have to escape. His escape plan was not a happy thought, so the Dementors couldn't take it from him. It was just an obsession. Meanwhile, Ron is like, this is not Peter Pettigrew. This is Scabbers. He's been in my family for 12 years, they say. That's an uncommonly long life for a garden rat, no? Sirius says that Crookshanks recognized Peter for what he was right away, and when Crookshanks met Sirius, he knew he was no dog. Apparently, Crookshanks stole the passwords to the Gryffindor common room from Neville's bedside table, so Neville didn't actually lose them. Sirius is apologizing. He's saying, Harry, I as good as killed them. I persuaded James and Lily to change the secret keeper. When I heard, I set out for your parents' house and I saw their house destroyed. I realized Peter must have been the spy. This is enough of a story to convince Ron to hand over Scabbers, who's like squeaking and squealing and like really just like freaking out. They use an enchantment to return Scabbers to his rightful form as an adult man, Peter Pettigrew, who has been sleeping in Ron's bed, hanging out with this child, truly cuddled up with him. Like, this is his pet. Like, imagine right now that it turns out your pet is the most disgusting man. This is traumatizing. Peter Pettigrew immediately denies everything. He's lying all over the place. He's a desperate man, just like his murder of all those muggles implies. He's like, well, I was hiding as a rat because I knew that Sirius was going to come after me one day. And Lupin was like, you knew Sirius was going to break out of Azkaban, even though nobody ever has. And Black's like, you haven't been hiding from me for 12 years. You've been hiding from all of the other Death Eaters because Voldemort met his end at the place where you told him to go. They think you turned on him. They think you're a double agent. You knew they'd come after you. I must admit, Peter, I have difficulty understanding why an innocent man would want to spend 12 years as a rat. You always liked big friends that would look after you, didn't you? Used to be us, me and Remus. I guess now it's other big friends for you. Sirius says, I thought it was a perfect plan, a bluff. Voldemort would clearly come after me. No one would dream that they'd use a weak, talentless thing like you. Hermione says, well, if Scabbers is working for you-know-who, why has he never tried to hurt Harry before? And Pettigrew's like, there. How about that? Smart girl. Because you never did anything for free. You never did anything unless you could see something in it for you. And Hermione says, Mr. Black, serious, sir? And he's like, oh my god, she's addressing me so kindly. He's like, how'd you get out of Azkaban? And he said he would obsess over this idea of getting out to save Harry. And the Dementors were less good at reading emotions when he was in dog form. And so one day, after he saw Pettigrew in the picture, he decided to just slip out. And they didn't notice. He swam back to shore in dog form and headed straight for Harry. He says, believe me, Harry, I never betrayed Lily and James. I would have died before I betrayed them. And Pettigrew's like, Ron, haven't I been a good friend? It's like, ew, what the? Stop. Remus is like, if you made her better rat than human, Peter, that's hardly something to boast about. And Black says, you sold out Lily and James. Do you deny it? And Pettigrew bursts into tears. He's making all sorts of excuses. Voldemort was clearly going to win. What was to be gained by denying him? And they're like, what was to be gained by fighting the most evil wizard of all time? And he's like, you don't understand. They would have killed me, Sirius. And Sirius says, then you should have died. And just as Remus and Sirius are about to kill Pettigrew, Harry runs forward and defends him and says, you can't kill him. They're like, stand aside, Harry. Like, this is the man responsible for the death of your parents. And he says, yeah, well, if he dies, the story dies with him. We use Pettigrew to clear your name. And I don't think my dad would want his 2 best friends to become murderers. Not for this guy. He's not worth it. Lupin says, very well, stand aside. They tie up Pettigrew. They mobilize Snape's body, so it's just like hanging, like floating, and it like clunks down the stairs of the Shrieking Shack, and like Snape keeps hitting his head. Lupin and Ron, to make sure that Pettigrew won't get away, they attach themselves to him. And there's a line that says Ron's face was set. He seemed to have taken Scabbers' betrayal personally, and it's like, yeah, this is the most horrifying thing I can think of, actually. Crookshanks leads the crew through their miles walk out of the Whomping Willow, Snape drifting along between them. And while they're walking, Harry and Sirius have a conversation. And Sirius discloses that he's Harry's godfather. And he says, well, you know, once my name is cleared, if you wanted a different home, like, you'd always be welcome with me. And Harry says he feels an explosion happen in his body. And Sirius says, of course, I didn't think you would want to. I understand if you want to stay with your aunt and uncle. Of course I want to be with you. Have you got a house? When can I move in? And Sirius's face breaks into a big smile, and they have this moment, and like Harry has family for the first time in his life. And Sirius asking Harry to live with him, Sirius is obviously not of Petunia's blood. It sort of puts a little bit of a pinch in the argument that Harry has to stay at the Dursleys in order to be protected. Or is Sirius just regarded as a strong enough Auror? Or did JKR think of the Petunia thing later to justify the Dursleys' abuse? I don't know. As they come out of the tree, they're all moving toward the castle when the clouds part and the moon shines upon Lupin. And he goes rigid and he starts transforming into a werewolf. And this is a problem for a number of reasons. The first one being that he's attached to Pettigrew and to Ron. So Ron is ultimately chained to the werewolf Remus Lupin. He hasn't taken his potion tonight, so he's not safe. Lupin's whole body is changing, and it causes him to drop his wand. Pettigrew picks up Lupin's wand. He knocks Ron unconscious, and then he turns himself back into a rat, and he flees. He's escaping into the night. Peter Pettigrew really proves, right? There was a lot of notoriety around Sirius Black because he was capable of killing 13 people with one blow. And the implication was that Black was a very powerful wizard because he did that. And yet, it's clear that Peter Pettigrew is no powerful wizard. He's actually a really weak, flimsy wizard. He's just a lowly guy, the least powerful, trying to save his own skin. It doesn't matter that he's an inner circle member in both parties. It doesn't matter that he has this authority or this access. He eventually is one of the most crucial Death Eaters, right? He's going to reanimate Lord Voldemort tonight, but we understand him to be weak and literally sniveling. And I think that that's relevant, particularly in today's day and age when we conflate power and authority with being deserving of respect. Sirius transforms into a dog to keep Lupin from hurting himself or the kids, and then it's just Hermione, an unconscious Ron, and an unconscious Snape. Sirius comes back, he transforms into his human form, and the Dementors spot him and they start to swarm around him. Harry and Hermione rush to his aid, and Harry's trying to think of like happy things. He's like, I'm gonna go live with Sirius, and he's shouting Expecto Patronum over and over again, thinking, I'm gonna live with Sirius. He's a free man. He's innocent. It's gonna be okay. I'm gonna live with Sirius. He's Expecto Patronum over and over and over again. Hermione eventually passes out next to him. Sirius passes out underneath him. Then a Dementor lifts Harry's face to its jaws and is about to administer this kiss, suck out Harry's soul at this moment, even though Harry has done nothing wrong. He can feel its breath when all of a sudden a blinding light illuminates all the grass around him, and all of the screaming inside of his head stops. He raises his head a few inches and sees an animal amid the light galloping away. Then he passes out. Harry wakes up in the hospital wing and he hears Fudge telling Snape that he's gonna award him an Order of Merlin, 2nd class, 1st class if he can swing it, for saving all of these kids and capturing Sirius Black. Snape says, I saw it immediately that Black had bewitched them. Clearly they'd been confounded to believe he was innocent. Fudge says, what amazes me most is the Dementors. Why didn't they kill these people, basically? We've never seen them behave that way. What drove them away? Snape says, I don't know, but whatever. Snape is pretty excited because he's just captured his high school bully, and Snape has taken a lot of L's in his life, right? Like, this is the first win for Snape, and he's about to be awarded an Order of Merlin. Like, this is a big deal. Harry looks over and sees that Hermione is also awake, and she looks really afraid. The two of them immediately start trying to explain that Peter Pettigrew is alive. He had faked his own death. He's an animagus. He's a rat. He's not registered with the Ministry of Magic. And Snape's like, you see, Minister, they're clearly distressed and confused. confused. Harry's like, I'm not distressed. I'm trying to tell you what's happening. Madame Pomfrey's like, you guys have to get out. You're making my patients anxious. I gotta give them chocolate. Then Professor Dumbledore comes in and he tells everyone else to leave. Snape is like, surely you don't believe Black's story. Dumbledore. Sirius Black showed that he was capable of murder at age 16. Dumbledore says, my memory is as good as it ever was. Get out. When they're alone with Dumbledore, they launch into the story. Pettigrew's front paw, his finger, he cut it off. Dumbledore says, listen, I believe you, but there's not a shred of evidence to support Black's story except your word. The word of two 13-year-old wizards doesn't mean much. And Professor Lupin is currently deep in the forest, unable to testify to anything. Moreover, werewolves are so mistrusted by most of our kind that his support will count for very little. Dumbledore says, but there's nothing we can do about it. They're about to administer the kiss of death on Sirius Black. And his heart starts to sink because he really did believe that there was nothing Dumbledore couldn't solve. What we need is more time. And if all goes well, you'll be able to save more than one innocent life tonight. Harry did not have a clue what they're talking about. He's like, but we don't have more time. And Hermione, meanwhile, is fumbling with her robes and pulling from beneath them a time turner. She puts the necklace around Harry's neck and starts spinning the time turner, and all of a sudden the room around Harry just starts whirling. And Harry's very disoriented. He's very confused. It's been a very long day. And all of a sudden they're standing in the hospital corridor and Hermione pushes him into a closet and is like, hold on. She's like, we have to stay here for a second. And Harry's like, what are we doing? We've gone back in time. Are you telling me that we're in this cupboard right here, but we're also out there right now? She's like, yes, this is a time turner. I got it from Professor McGonagall at the beginning of the year so that I could make it to all my classes. That's how I end up being in 3 places at once. She had to write all sorts of letters to the Ministry of Magic so that I could have one. She had to swear that I would never use it for anything other than school, which is what they're doing right now. It's 3 hours ago right now, and we are currently walking down to Hagrid's. Hermione's like, I'm just not sure what we're supposed to be doing. And Harry figures out that they're supposed to be saving Buckbeak and using Buckbeak to help Sirius escape. Once they hear themselves under the invisibility cloak heading toward Hagrid's, run down from the castle and enter the Forbidden Forest through the tree line, and they're watching themselves go into Hagrid's house. And Harry's like, this is by far the weirdest thing we've ever done. And he's like, okay, let's go get Buckbeak. And Hermione's like, no, we can't take him yet. They have to see that Hagrid did not let Buckbeak go. Harry's like, that's going to give us about a minute to get Buckbeak out. And Harry's like, I think I'm going to run into Hagrid's right now and grab Peter Pettigrew. Hermione says, no, Harry, you can't do that. What would happen right now if you saw yourself run into Hagrid's hut? And he says he'd probably think there was some very dark magic going on. Hermione says really bad things happen to wizards who meddle with time. There's a lot of things that you can't do, even though you technically could do them, because it would be dangerous for you and, I don't know, the world. The implications are never thoroughly explained. They see themselves leave the hut. They see the Minister of Magic, the Executioner, and Dumbledore go into Hagrid's hut. They move to save Buckbeak. And Harry remembers to bow, which just personally, like, my ADHD ass, like, this is when it would end for me. I would have messed it up right there. But Harry and Hermione are able to get Buckbeak into the tree line of the woods just as the Executioner and the Minister of Magic and Dumbledore come outside. And Dumbledore's like, Buckbeak has been stolen. And they're like, okay, well, let's search the grounds. The thing can fly. Search the skies if you must. I personally am going to have a tea or perhaps a large cup of brandy. And him and Hagrid go and drink and celebrate the fact that Buckbeak is not going to die. The Executioner does swing the axe, but he cuts a pumpkin, not Buckbeak's head. Then, from there, Harry and Hermione have to hold on to Buckbeak while they just watch themselves go and engage in the altercation in the Whomping Willow. Harry says it's like torturous to sit there and just watch this all unfold. He's like, if I could just stop Snape, I could go steal the invisibility cloak. And Hermione says, no, Harry, we can't change anything that's already happened. And this was demonstrated with the charms class. I'm going to explain that in a second. While they're standing there, they watch Hagrid meander up toward the castle tipsily. Like, truly, like, we've only seen Hagrid drunk this whole year. While they're standing there and waiting, Hermione says, Harry, I don't understand. Why didn't the Dementors kill us? And Harry says there was a Patronus, a real Patronus, a powerful one. It must have been a really powerful wizard to drive away all those Dementors. And Harry says he has an idea about who he thinks it was based on the glimpse he saw, but he knows it's not possible. He can't be sure. He eventually confides that he thinks he saw his dad conjure that Patronus. He wonders if, with Moony, Wormtail, and Padfoot all on the grounds tonight, perhaps Prongs showed up too. And Hermione is like, Harry, your dad's dead. He knows. He freaking knows that. He's like, yeah, I know, it's just a thought. Anyway, they can't interfere as they watch Peter Pettigrew escape a second time. The two of them run toward Hagrid's cabin to hide from Lupin, the werewolf who's on the loose, and Harry says he has to go watch what happens with the Patronus just in case his dad does show up. Remember, Harry, you can't interfere, and so Hermione and Buckbeak wait inside of Hagrid's cabin while Harry goes to the edge of the woods to watch to see who shows up to conjure such an enormous and powerful Patronus. As he's waiting there, he's thinking any minute now, come on, like he's watching himself die and he knows that the moments are running out. He's about to have his soul sucked out when all of a sudden he realizes that no one is coming to save Harry. And unfortunately, that will be true for the entirety of the series. Harry is going to be responsible for saving himself. And in that moment, he conjures the most powerful, most luminescent Patronus that a young wizard or almost any wizard could dream of conjuring. He delivers on the magic that is asked of him, proving, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he is a great wizard, perhaps great enough even to live up to his name. He sees his Patronus come back to greet him, and it's not a unicorn, it's not a horse, it's a stag. Prongs. So the innocent lives that were spared were not just Buckbeak's and not just Sirius's, but Harry's and Hermione's as well. Harry says he knew he could do it this time because he already had. And that's very important. Believing that you're capable of something is a necessary component of achieving it. Harry and Hermione get on Buckbeak, and Hermione is like, she does not like it. She's like, oh my god, I don't like it. They fly up to the tower where Sirius is being held. Hermione says, stand back. They break off the lock on his door. Sirius boards Buckbeak, not before asking what happened to Ron because he feels bad about Ron's broken leg. Sirius tells Harry that he is truly his father's son and that they will see each other again one day. He gets to believe for an hour that he's going to have this different life with his father's best friend, with the two of them living together, with no more abuse from the Dursleys, and it is snatched away from him so quickly because they will be unable to clear Black's name without Peter Pettigrew, and Pettigrew is gone. The kids have to run back up to the hospital wing because they have to be where they were when they disappeared. Peeves is wandering around the castle, so they have to wait for him to leave before they can run up. They're panicking, they're running, and they just greet Dumbledore as he's about to lock the doors to the hospital wing. Dumbledore is beaming. So let me just explain the timeline really quick. This is all operating, my understanding based on the internet research I did, is that this is all operating under a single timeline theory. This is not like a multiverse theory. This is that there is one timeline, and no matter how many Harrys and Hermiones there is one timeline, and you can't change anything that has happened. That's why Hermione could not go back and change the fact that she missed charms. You can only change the future. So this plan only works because Dumbledore has intention to facilitate and execute it when he is walking down to Hagrid's hut before Buckbeak's execution. If he did not have that intention, none of this would have been able to happen, which is why Hermione can't go back and repeat charms, because she didn't have intention to miss charms. She can't go back and fix that she missed charms. They had to go back because they already did. In every timeline, there's just the two of them there, which leads me to believe that there are a lot of Hermiones just about the school at any given time during this school year, because she's at least going to 3 classes at once. But that's why it works. And that makes sense to me, that it's about intention to proceed. It's about changing the future. So Dumbledore, before Buckbeak is executed, has intention to change the future. And that's why it works. And I don't know why Dumbledore has to be so vague about his instructions. Perhaps he's training Harry to operate on vague instructions, or maybe it's just because he knows that whatever he says is going to work, because Dumbledore is already privy to the fact that Buckbeak was not executed at the time that the kids are about to go back in time and save Buckbeak. Anyway, he locks them in, then they hear the commotion. It becomes clear to the Minister of Magic and to Snape that Sirius has escaped. The Minister of Magic is maybe he disapparated. Snape says it's impossible to disapparate from the castle. I know Potter had something to do with this. And Snape tries to go storming into the hospital ring. He's screaming, and Madame Pomfrey is like, Snape, you can't talk to my patients like that. Dumbledore says, this ward has been locked since I left. Madame Pomfrey, did these children go anywhere? And she's like, no, obviously not. And Dumbledore says, well, you can't be in 2 places at once, so. But I gotta believe that Snape knows a little bit about the Time Turner, right? Some of the other teachers must notice that Hermione is in conflicting classes, right? This is the only part of the book that I don't buy, that Snape doesn't know about the Time Turner. Anyway, Fudge says Snape seems pretty unbalanced. Snape's no longer going to get his second class Order of Merlin. Fudge also says that the Dementors will be like reprimanded and obviously pulled away from the school immediately. He never dreamed that they'd attempt to perform the kiss on an innocent child, but Dumbledore knew that they would do that. Once everyone is gone, the commotion has died down. Ron wakes up and is like, what did I miss? What was all that about? And Harry says, you explain. And Hermione tells him everything, which is also really different from the movie. The movie makes it out to sort of ally Harry and Hermione against Ron, which I don't like. Anyway, the next day, the kids are talking about the extraordinary events of the nights before. They find out that they all passed their exams. They're watching the giant squid waving its tentacles lazily across the lake. Hagrid tells them that Professor Lupin is a werewolf. Snape let it slip to his class of Slytherins this morning, so Lupin has resigned because the calls from teachers will be coming in any minute now. No one feels safe with a werewolf around their children. Harry runs to Lupin's office and says, but you're the best defense against a dark arts teacher we've ever had. They have their conversation. They sort of say their goodbye. Lupin gives back Harry's invisibility cloak, and he also gives him the Marauders map, which he doesn't have to feel any sort of guilt about because he's not a teacher anymore. Harry and Lupin say goodbye, and then Harry is later saying to Dumbledore that it didn't make any difference, that Pettigrew still got away, demonstrating the trade, right? Harry's goodness, his decision to save Peter Pettigrew means sacrificing something important, living with Sirius and clearing Sirius's name for the greater cause. Dumbledore says, how can you say that? You uncovered the truth and you saved an innocent man. They both lived. Harry then tells Dumbledore about Trelawney's prediction, and Dumbledore's like, that's, I think, her second accurate prediction. And Harry says, well, then it's my fault if Voldemort comes back. It does not make it your fault. What you've done is send Voldemort a servant that's in your debt. Peter Pettigrew owes you a life debt now. This is very strong and powerful magic. And now, Voldemort's second-hand man owes you. Dumbledore says, I knew your father very well, Harry, at Hogwarts and after, and he would have saved Pettigrew as well. I expect you'll tire of hearing it, but you do look extraordinarily like James. Except for the eyes. You have your mother's eyes. Your father is alive in you, Harry, and shows himself most plainly when you have need of him. How else could you produce that particular Patronus? You found your father inside of yourself. Dumbledore tells us that our loved ones that die never truly leave us, because a piece of them exists within us. I am so heavy-hearted when I get to the end of these books or movies. Like, I am also so sad that the year is over. I always have to like start them over and watch them from the beginning because I like can't leave myself not at Hogwarts. Does that say something about me? Gryffindor House, largely thanks to their win of the Quidditch Cup, has again won the Hogwarts House Cup. Hermione turns in the Time Turner. She doesn't want it anymore. It was driving her crazy. She was too overwhelmed. And Ron offers Harry to come and stay with them this summer at some point in time, that his dad is trying to get tickets to the Quidditch World Cup. As the kids are on the train, they're greeted by a very small, tiny gray owl that Harry says feels like a fluffy snitch in his hand. And with that tiny owl is a letter from Sirius that says, it was I who sent you the firebolt. Consider it 13 years worth of presents from a godfather who's missed you very much. And Hermione's like, like I knew it was Sirius. I knew it was from Sirius. And Sirius says that he sent Crookshanks to the bank with an owl to get the money to get the firebolts. It all works out. He also apologizes because he believes he may have given him a fright when he came to visit him at Magnolia Crescent. It was him who summoned the night bus. So Harry really was seeing a big black dog everywhere, and it was Sirius Black. He also encloses a permission slip so that Harry can attend Hogsmead next year. He says, I thought your friend Ron might like to keep this owl, as it's my fault he no longer has a rat. Like, thank God. Are you kidding me? Then Ron holds out the tiny owl for Crookshanks to sniff. What do you reckon? Definitely an owl? Then Harry gets off the train. He's going back to, yes, a doomed summer at the Dursleys, but this year he has an extra secret weapon. He tells the Dursleys that his godfather is actually the escaped convict Sirius Black, and he doesn't tell them that he's innocent. So the Dursleys will be even more afraid of him than ever before. This book kicks us off into the next phase of this series. There's about a 600-page gap between Prisoner of Azkaban and Goblet of Fire, and I am so excited to dive into the content of those pages with you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time. My name is Sage. Bye.